Thank you, Father, for this wonderful opportunity to come humbly before you and just studying your word and see all the fascinating things within your word humbles us. And just realize how awesome, intelligent, and supernaturally competent you are. And that you give us this little bit of grace just to have an insight into some of the aspects into your Torah. Father, help us so we can comprehend what you want to share today. Also work through me, speak through your spirit. So it's not my words, but your words. And help us to understand what we need to understand, learn what we need to learn for us today within this physical location we're in, within our time frame, and within the prophetic timeline. I ask it in all in the mighty name of Yeshua Mashiach. Amen. All right, so I've got a very psychedelic picture there. It's all about the eye, but the eye we will get to at the end. I just want to emphasize that because the letter ayin, that means eye, is the root of all evil. If you think about the storyline in Genesis, Chava or Eve saw the tree with the fruit and it looked good. And then she got enchanted by the Nachash or the serpent, and that caused the fall of man. So the eye is the cause of many sins. So we're going to look at, I'm just going to quickly jump through the themes. We're going to look at the three main types of sin towards the end. And they all are linked to the Day of Atonement, which is the main topic of this Torah study, which is part of Acharei Mot, which is the first topic within the Torah portion. I didn't realize it's a double Torah portion again, so we came from a double portion, and then we had a previous double portion because of Pesach, and then because of my daughter's wedding, and now this one is again a double one. But what's interesting, if you look at the two Torah portions in relation to one another, it says, after death, be holy. And that is relevant to us as well, because we come to Messiah, we have to die in ourselves, and after that, you walk a life of holiness or set apartness, because you don't exist anymore. You only exist because of Him. You don't live for yourself anymore. Everything you do is for Him. Everything is set apart unto Him because you have died when you gave yourself to Him. And that's the whole idea of this. We're going to link it back to the previous Torah portions we've done, which is about the fascinating topic of leprosy, which is normally something people walk around because it's a bit gory. But we're going to just step back and take up the storyline and continue it because it's still continuing the same theme that we're going to continue. The other thing we're going to look at is Kedoshim, which is the plural for holiness, which is multiple people need to be holy. We're going to dissect that a little bit, and then we're going to focus on the concept of righteousness, holiness, and how it links with truth and faith. There's a bit there, so we're not going to touch a lot on Kedoshim. And in the beginning of this Torah portion, we're going to basically step back into the previous one, because the starting of this one, specifically the name of this Torah portion, links perfectly with the theme of last week, which is all about leprosy and the cleansing of the leper, specifically this fallen state. I highlight the two letters there just as a bit of a make you aware. So Acharei Mot, you can immediately see those who are familiar with Hebrew. It starts with an Aleph, it ends with a Taf. And that's a symbol of the Aleph Taf or Mashiach. And of course, inside there's something. So we're going to dissect Acharei and the Mem to see what that means in relation to this theme of Acharei Mot, which means after death. So a very interesting Torah portion, and I hope you find it interesting. All right, so to start off, I'm just going to get a bit philosophical about my philosophy in studying the Torah. So my personal view is that you cannot study the scripture without the framework of the Torah. The Torah is designed for us to interact with it as His bride, because the vowel points are female. They are hidden. They're not in the original text. All the text in the Torah Scroll are consonants, which are male. And the female and the male interact with one another, and it brings forth something that's personal to the female reader or to the one who interacts with the Torah. That's why the Torah is very personal when you read it and interact with it. A lot of things we're going to do today is a reflection on my personal life, as well as things that are happening in this world, in history, as well as in the prophetic timeline. So the way I see it is the light that shines from my understanding, from my life, from the prophetic picture, and also from our historical picture, is the light that reflects on the page. Now, what we have on the page is the black letters on white space. Now, as we know, black absorbs. So we're going to dig deep into the letters that will absorb us and draw us into them. And we're going to dissect the hidden things that are hidden within the dark letters, so to speak. But also we're going to reflect, which are the white space, back on our lives, which are the things that are not written. Because there's wisdom connected between every single letter. There's wisdom connected from one word to another, and also from one passage to another, and from things that's linked from here to somewhere else. Also reflecting back to the prophecies, reflecting forward into the New Testament, and also into the future, which is the prophetic time frame. So that interaction is what makes the Torah alive and real for myself, and I think we've discovered that as a group together as well. So that's my own little philosophy about that. So the other thing about studying the Torah, which I'm very mindful of, it's got a storyline. So I always take one step back, maybe a few steps back, and just pick up the storyline and just pull it into this Torah portion. Because it's a flow of information. There's always a theme that we can draw and we can connect things. And when we do that, it gives us a zoomed out view of what Yahweh is actually doing from multiple layers perspective. So just for this Torah portion, because we're looking at after death, we're looking at the death of Aaron's two sons that was by fire in relation to the Day of Atonement, which prophetically links to the Day of Judgment. And when we look at that, we also know in the book of Revelation, after the judgment, the New Jerusalem will come down. When we look back on the book of Exodus, the temple was prepared and finished and ready. Now we're looking at the state of this world, which is a leprous state. Then we're going to look at the cleansing of the leprous state, which includes the cleansing of fire, which is about the offering. Every offering has fire or to do with fire. And that cleansing fire correlates with the prophetic picture of the judgment and the fire that will come down, which is the cleansing and the foundation. One of the root word meanings of fire means foundation. And that cleansed the foundation for the new earth, for the new Jerusalem, or the tabernacle to come down. That was prepared in Shemot. So in Genesis, we have Bereshit, the beginning. Shemot is the preparing of the tabernacle. Leviticus is about exposing leprosy, dealing with leprosy, healing leprosy, and the cleansing of everything that was contaminated by leprosy. And then we're going to move on to day 8, which is new beginnings. So that's a zoomed out view of what the purpose of the 5 books are. So we're going to not discuss the other 2 books that's still to come, but relevant to this Torah portion, that's where we're at. Looking at the cleansing, healing, as well as the preparation of the new temple that will come down. All right, so in this Torah portion, it's about the Day of Atonement, slaughtering of the animals, eating of blood, sexual relations. So we're not going to look at anything other than the animals it's going to be slaughtered and the detail of every offering. So that's where the Gematria is going to come into, where we're going to delve a bit deeper into what is the purpose of the ox or the 2 goats. Not only looking at the meanings of those words and the root meanings and where they're found, we're going to look at the Gematria of them and then extract a lot of information that we never knew before about the sacrifices. And the reason I think that is evident is because the whole Torah is a supernatural text. It's a code that reveals more than what we can read on the surface. And we as non-Hebrew scholars, we sort of get an idea what the Hebrew can do. But when we go into the code itself, which is more the supernatural makeup of this whole book, which links perfectly with everything else, it's perfectly in harmony, we can see the spiritual gear work behind the scenes that need to turn and to restore this whole fallen creation, and why Yahweh chose specific animals and specific things to conduct a specific function to restore a specific part of his fallen creation. So that's what we're going to get into. And then we'll get appreciation for Yahweh's intelligence on how he, when he spoke the first words in creation, everything in parallel up to the end was created as well and embedded within the text itself, including all the animals, the meaning of the animals, and he foreknew everything that's going to happen and everything that need to be restored, and everything was created in physical to support all of that and give us insights what's happening behind the scenes as well. So it's a very complex thing to think about, but if we think about that, Yahweh is a very complex God. And if we want to study him, we have to take it slow because it's complex. And we're going to sort of delve a little bit into that today. So I hope you find it a bit insightful and get appreciation for Yahweh's intelligence. All right, to recap, we looked at last week on the enemy found within the name of the second Torah portion we looked at, which was last week's Torah portion, Metzorah. And what you'll see there, Metzorah, Mem, Tzadik, Resh, Ayin, inside the word Metzorah is the word tar. And tar basically represents the enemy within, found within the gematria of tar, which is 308, which means underground chamber, to deal violently with, to destroy, ruin, stinky things, stinkweed, to mix, to go astray, to be disappointed. So those are all the negative meanings that associate with what it means to be in bondage. Now, what you'll see there, the word mixing is in there. We also find the word mixing in the concept of the New Testament revealing the system of Babylon, that means mixing and confusion. As I said previously, Babylon is not something in itself. It's something like cancer that can corrupt anything in this creation. It can corrupt a spiritual entity like a church. It can corrupt a political entity like a government system. And everything will be corrupted or is corrupted by this cancer called Babylon, which comes from the opposer, or the Nachash, also referred to as the Antichrist and the devil and Hasatan and Satan. So all of those things are to keep us bound up, just like Israel was bound in Egypt, Mitzrayim, that means sin and bondage. We are now bound in a fallen state, as if we are in an underground chamber that is dark. Now, the darkness reflects on the fact that we don't know everything. We need light to reveal more to us. And we are in a dark world. And even people who doesn't study the word, they're in a deeper level of darkness because they don't even know the basic truth of Yahweh's word. So that's where the bondage in this underground dark chambers, symbolism come into play through the mixing. And the enemy want to deal violently with us and want to feed us stinkweed, which is the opposite of green pastures that Yahweh want to feed us as his sheep, which is basically feeding us things that are not good for us, which is not his word. And then as you move on through the meanings, the blue meanings there: green grass, dwelling place, abode, to grow, to increase, spice, ointment, perfume, precious stone, compassionate, and Elohim, help. Those positive meanings are basically based on the work that's going to be done by the Messiah to release us from this enemy, tar, that is currently within. So that's just a bit of a recap on that. The word tar is first found in Deuteronomy 4 verse 30, which talks about when you are in tribulation, all these things are come upon you, even the latter days, if you turn to Yahweh your Elohim and shall be obedient unto his voice, he shall not abandon you and destroy you or forget the covenant of your fathers, which he swore to them. So we see that the same language that's used in the book of Revelation, we see that in the book of Deuteronomy, linked to this word that's linked to leprosy, that's linked to this leper state, which is the state of bondage. So that's just a starting point from last week's Torah portion. Also from last week, I've got an embryo and a sperm there. It's all about the Torah portion called Tazaria. And that means to conceive seed. Now, the concept of conceiving seed is where this word zara, which is the root word of tazaria, is found in Genesis 1 verse 11, which talks about the yielding of the seed, zara, fruit of yielding after each own kind, every tree. So the seed is within the fruit, and the seed produced after its own kind. And in relation to creation and even being pregnant, the mother conceives after the kind of the seed which is from the father. Now, when Yahweh created man, he said, we are to be after his image and his likeness. And that's basically similar to saying we are after his kind. So what is his kind like? So we found that in the word for kind, which is mean, mem yod nun, that means species, kind, and sort. And that contains the word man, if you remove the word yad, which is the word hand. And it's a picture of a hand giving manna. So that's Yahweh giving manna to his people. And that word manna, or mean, relates to the word Yamani, which is in the previous Torah portion, Yemeni, which is in the previous Torah portion, where the two hands pick up the manna, and that's the word for right, or to move to the right. And we're going to see the same word today as well. So to be righteous, moving to the right, right is always spiritual, and that is the people who actually picked up the manna, and those who picked up the manna are those who obeyed the voice of Yahweh, because the other nations didn't have the knowledge, they didn't pick up the manna, and they couldn't conform to Yahweh's kind. Now, where it becomes fascinating in Numbers 11 verse 7, we get more information about manna. It's reflected to be the same as a coriander seed, and it had the color of bdellium. Now, bdellium is the word bedolach. That means something in pieces, fragment, a gum tree, the gum of a gum tree, and it actually says it's a white gum.
Gum from a tree.
A gum from a tree, sorry, not the gum tree. And a white pearl that is precious and excellent. The root word badal means to divide, to separate, distinguish, differ, select, make difference, separate itself, which is the concept of holiness. And bdellium is a white color, and that word badal is first found in Genesis 1 verse 4, that says Elohim saw the light and it was good, and Elohim divided light from darkness. So the brightest form of light, or the truest representation of the color of white, is found in the brightest form of white light. And that is the concept of Yahweh. When Yahweh says, I am holy, it's like the brightest light that you can imagine, not just the color white, but a radiant light that hurt your eye. That is how bright his holiness is. And we are supposed to be after his kind. So we can look at today on what it means to be holy. It's basically to become like him through interacting with his supernatural word, which is his manna that he offered us, that we are now picking up. And that interaction with his manna, or supernatural food, which is his word revealed by his spirit, makes us white again. So that's the concept in the New Testament, where it says we need to shine our lights in this dark world. You don't have light in yourself. It's only through interacting with his word where your little lights start to shine. And the more truth you receive, the more faith you interact with that, the more holiness or light radiates from you in this dark world. And people who are looking for light will stumble across your path, and you will be able to engage with them and bring them into the house of Yahweh. So that's the purpose of being white or being holy. It's not for salvation, it's for the salvation of others. Coriander is the word gad. That's the root word gadat. That's also the name of one of the tribes. That means to gather together, to penetrate, to cut, to attack, and to invade. That's a basic function of a sperm, to conceive seed or to become pregnant. But it's also, in a spiritual sense, the gathering of Yahweh's people after he attacked the enemy and freed the holy ones, and who separated themselves. So it's a prophetic picture of that as well. And we last week we saw I think it's the next one. Yes, we saw that the whole prophetic birth process, because this woman conceived and then she was purified over 66 days after the birth of a daughter. Now, the word number 66 had significance. I'm not going to go into that there. But the birth process, on the conception of humans, we are created in Yahweh's image, but not yet in his likeness. That we read in Genesis. He only repeats and said, we made in his image. In his image, he created us. But previously he said we are supposed to be in his image and his likeness. So what is his likeness? It's to be after his kind, which is the kind that exists after the second work of Messiah, when we will receive renewed bodies. And that renewed body state is what Adam experienced before sin came, where he was in the garden and his skin radiated the glory of Yahweh. So he had the holiness radiating from his body, which was his skin. Now, the whole picture is that the fallen state of this earth is like the womb. And we are in this dark waters of the womb. And at the end of time, when we cross the Jordan, which is the Great Tribulation, Matthew 24 talks about the time of sorrows, and the previous to the birth, you get the birth pains, and then the birth is the Great Tribulation. That's where the people of this fallen state will be born into a higher level, which is the renewed body state, where we will be elevated to the state which Yahweh intended in the first place when he created Adam. And the people who are not aligned with the birth channel, they will be breech babies, and we're going to see that today as well, a picture of that. And they will cause pain and even cause death to themselves, not being aligned with the birth canal to be born into this high level. And they will be born or in a fallen state and exist after the second coming. As we read in Zechariah 14, they will be the ones outside the city, and they will go up to Jerusalem every year. And if they don't do that, they will be cursed. And that's after the city came down. So just a broad storyline on the birth and the concept of the Great Tribulation, that is to be born, and the concept of babies that will live and babies that will die during this process. Those who will live in a newness of life. Those who will die will be in a fallen state, still bound on this earth and ready for the next cycle of elevation, which we're going to look at as well. All right, so the birth was linked to Daniel 11 when we look at the Great Tribulation. This gives us a bit more detail about that. And when we read through this, and the reason I stumbled upon this verse is we looked at the meaning of, what was it? Oh, it's a number 66, which is not in this study. And one of the meanings of the number 66 on the gematria was whirlwind. And the whirlwind and the wheels and the ships are three things that are found within the gematria of 66. And those three things are found in Daniel 11 as well. So Daniel 11 gives us the detail of the cleansing of the woman period, which is basically the time of the birth and after the birth, which is the 1,000 years of peace, and what will happen during those times. So the times of sorrows are described here in verse 21 and 23, where it talks about a vile person who will obtain the kingdom by flatteries, and that's the nature of the Nachash. Nachash means enchanter, and that's also translated as serpent. And through his flatteries, he deceived the people who are the richest in this realm. Now, if you reflect on that today, who are the people who are the richest in this realm today? They are the people like Bill Gates and Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and whoever. Not saying they're corrupt or whatever, but they are the ones who the vile one will want to interact with, because they are the minority that's got the power to influence the kingdom of the south, which is the context of this prophecy. And he's he done it through his flatteries. Now that we see today as well, through all the things that's happening around us, we see it's a lot of flatteries. It's not common sense. It doesn't make sense. A lot of confusion. We see Babylon all around us through the media and all the things that's happening. You can't put your finger on COVID or what's happening around us. So all of those things are part of the birth pains. And the vile leader took control over the kingdoms of the south. And then at the end, we'll see how he engaged into getting them to go against the Holy Covenant. And he took action and made a war against the people of the covenant. And in that verse there in Daniel 11, verse 29, it talks about the two things that will happen. That's also mentioned in Matthew 24, that will start the Great Tribulation. The sacrifices will be stopped and the abomination of desolation will be set up in the holy place. And that will trigger the birth. And then after the birth or during the birth, Daniel 11, verse 40 to 41 talks about the time of the end, the king of the south shall push at him, but the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots, with horsemen, and with many ships. And that's where the king of the north, which is a picture of Yahweh, will come against the kingdom of the south, which is the kingdom of this world, or the Babylonian system. And he will come and overcome them. And then it says in verse 45, and he shall pitch the tabernacle of his palace between the seas and the beautiful holy mountain. That's the New Jerusalem that will come down. So everything is prophetically in line with this whole birth process that we looked at last week. And this whole birth process is the Great Tribulation. But now we're going to look at this Great Tribulation from another point of view, from the point of view of the Day of Atonement and what that represents. So we just have another layer upon the same theme and give us a bit more insight into that. All right, so any questions or comments on last week's little recap? All right, so with that little foundational setting, let's get into this week's one. Now, just coming into this Torah portion, Acharei Mot, quickly recapping just a few terms there. The great birth or great sorrow is Rabba Itzabon, which means the accumulation of sorrow or the adding of sorrow. And that's the birth process where the born again concept will come in. And in Revelation, we read about a lot of people that you won't be able to count that will stand before the throne with white robes. And they are the ones who came out of the Great Tribulation. And we're going to look at that phrase to come out of in this Torah portion as well. And it's the product or the harvest of the great pain or sorrows or the birth that will take place. Now, what we discovered last week is that those people are actually people with leprosy. Let me just see. No, we're not going to touch on that. We're going to touch on that a bit later, the detail about that. So I'm not going to go into that now. All right, so the name of this Torah portion is Acharei Mot. As I said, it's got an Aleph Tav, and it's got Acharei and Mem Vav in it. Aleph means beginning, Tav means end. It's the Aleph Tav or the Messiah. Within that word, you find two phrases or two words. Huri, that means Horite, or it's translated as Horite, that means cave dweller. And Mo, that's a prefix that means from. It's similarly used in the word Moab or Moab. That means from the father or of the father. And in the same way, if you look at Acharei Mot, it is coming from the Tav, which is the product of death. Tav represents death as well. So the people who will come out of this state of death, or out of this state of being dying and being resurrected, that is what these cave dwellers are all about. Now, cave dwellers are those who are bound up in these dark chambers that we discussed previously, which is this fallen world. And from that chamber, that's where they will come from, and they will stand before Yahweh as a result of this great tribulation. Now, cave dwellers or Huri has got a gematria of 128. That means to delay, to tarry. Yahweh has created thing, creation, birth, labor, pain, sorrow, hardship. Now, from those meanings, it perfectly links back to the previous Torah portion of the concept of the woman giving birth. And then it says hardship, cave dweller, trembling, panic, thing that is cursed. And that's basically what they will experience during the time of tribulation. They will not know what's happening. People run around panicking and fear and tremble and not know what's happening while they experience this hardship and sorrow. Then he's got the word new moon, which is a term for a new cycle that's going to begin, that connects to the word for creation, or Yahweh has created. Now, in the previous Torah portion, we touched on the concept of cycles. Now, when we look at the weekly cycle, the cycle of creation, it starts on day 1, it finishes on day 7, which is the day of rest. And then you have the next week, which is day 1, but it could also be day 8 of the previous cycle. So the 8th day of the Feast of Sukkot is similar to the first day of the new cycle. And this new cycle is similar to our creation cycle. The reason I call it our creation cycle, because when you read Bereshit, the earth was in a state of darkness. It was covered, and it was full of emptiness, and it was void, but it existed. It is as if it's in a state after judgment, after it was cleansed or covered or destroyed. And then the creation cycle happened from that foundational point of the previous cycle's end. Now, when we read Revelation, we read about a similar cycle's end, which is our cycle, where there will be destruction, but this time it will be by fire. And the fire is the cleansing foundational work that needs to happen to cleanse us from this leprous state before the tabernacle can be established. And that is the new beginning or the new creation process of the new cycle of day 8. So that's the overlining pattern that I'm using to link these words within these cycles that we're going to look at. Now, from the previous teaching, we linked the word tsar to the dark chambers where the people were bound in the fallen state. And these people are now referred to as the cave dwellers, who are panicking when the time of destruction or judgment is coming. Now, what's interesting about the word new moon, it's linked to the number 15. If you look at the feast cycle, the new moon is always on the 15th of the month within the feast cycle. And number 15 is linked to the 15th letter of the Aleph Bet, which is the letter Samech. Now, 4 Torah portions ago, around about the time of Pesach, Pesach contains the letter Samech, and we discovered that Samech represents a circle. If you look at the circle from the top, or a cycle, it looks like a circle, but you put it on its side and you look from it from a side view, it's like a spiral over time. So our time frame that we are found or bound within, we see time as a cyclical spiral. But when Yahweh looks at it, he's above time. He sees it as a circle. So from his point of view, that's where the Samech comes in. But that spiral or cycle, we also connected to the 2 pillars, the pillar of fire, the pillar of cloud, or the pillar of water, which are the 2 symbols that we found in the Leaving Egypt pattern. And for a pillar to exist, if you look at it from a water perspective, a hurricane or a tornado is basically the spinning forces that create the pillar. And inside the pillar is the eye of the tornado where there is peace. Now, what we discovered was that the cycles of the Samech represents the cycles of 7, which is also relating to the judgment cycles, which we read in Revelation, the 3 types of cycles of judgment. But it also relates to the Moedim cycle as well as the Sabbath cycle. So when you engage with the cycles of 7, they will slap you around until you pass through them into the eye of the needle where you enter into his rest. And like Israel, they were actually protected by these 2 pillars because they entered into his rest symbolically. So that's where the Samech comes in. The other thing about a tornado, it's got an upward thrust force that will elevate anything that it engages with. So the cycles of 7 are there to elevate us from a lower level to a higher spiritual mature level and up to the point of a glorious level, which is the final state that we want to be in. So that's the idea of the Samech, just to quickly recap. All right, so the birth or beginning of this new cycle is basically what the cave dwellers will experience as they engage with this whirlwind of cycles of 7, which are the 7 plagues, the 7 seals, trumpets, and bowls that they will engage with. And some of them will be elevated and others will just be destroyed through the interaction of that. And that is our link to Yom Kippur and Day of Atonement, which is this whole idea. Now, the other thing about the word chori, it is first found in Genesis 14, verse 6, where it says, the Horites dwelled at Mount Seir unto El Paran, which is by the wilderness. Now, seer is the word sair. That means hairy, kid, goat, rough, and devil. So seer comes from the root word sa'ar, that means terrified, be afraid, whirlwind, hurl as a storm. So we see exactly the same language and symbolism that we experience when we look at the language used to describe the birth, as well as the judgment, as well as the cycles of seven and the cycles of the plagues found in Revelation. And people will be terrified and afraid, the cave dwellers. And what the purpose is of this is to judge the devil, which is the one who sits behind it. Yahweh is never intended to judge humans. But if humans are part of the system, they will be destroyed with the system. If they are saturated with darkness when a light appears, they will be judged, or the light will consume them, and they will no longer exist except the little bits that's left, which are holy. So that's a beautiful supporting concept of this word churi, that's the cave dwellers, and what they will experience during the time of tribulation, and what the intent of judgment is. What's interesting is it says they dwelled at Mount Seir, which is the Mount of the Goats, or the Mount Goat. And the reason I say that is it gives me the idea of the three mountains, or the third mountain that we are discovering through our journey walking through the Torah. The first one was Mount Sinai. It's also known as Mount Thorn, where Yahweh spoke, where Yahweh's authority was established. Last week, we looked at the mountain of the Amorites, and they were afraid when they encountered the mountain. And Amorite means to speak. So they were afraid to speak against the strongholds and the powers and principalities that they faced, based on the example they received when Yahweh spoke. And the reason why this was important, because Pesach, we discussed at Passover that Pesach is the releasing of speech. The samech is the support, pays the mouth, and chet means life. So it gives life to the mouth, it supports the mouth, and it allows us to speak. If you are, the difference between a human and an animal basically is that animals can't speak, we can. So if your speech is bound, and that's the concept of Mitzrayim in Egypt, you become like an animal that just performs work on behalf of or for the benefit of the enemy. So to release the speech is basically to release the animal state into a kind, which is Yahweh's kind, so we can now speak up. What do we need to speak? Yahweh gave us his words, and he said we need to speak his word as well. And Yeshua gave us the example when he was tempted in the wilderness. He said, it is written, and he spoke. When they came to this mountain of the Amorites, they trembled at the enemy. They did not speak. So we should not be afraid. Whatever we come across during this end time period that we're entering into, we should speak up and speak the word against those powers and principalities. Mm-hmm. You want to give us a little testimony of that?
What?
Of what we did and what the outcome currently is.
Oh, yes. So Philip's we told you about standing in the gap last week and how we've been doing that. So, and you briefly know about my children. So this week, Jesse spoke to Kayla and he said, please give my number to mum and dad, calling me mum and dad again. And we can have a chat. And he also liked some of Kayla's wedding photos, specifically the ones where we were at. And I decided to send Melissa a couple of the wedding photos. And I said to her, in spite of what you believe, I miss you and I love you very much. And she sent me a message back, Mum, I miss you very much, with little things. So, standing in the gap, warfare.
Now, so all the little tools we picked up as we travel through the Torah, I've been applying them daily. And I just speak to the enemy. I destroy their powers and principalities and cover the people who are currently bound up by those things. So that's the authority that we have. And the problem we have as believers in Messiah, we never understand our authority in him. When we see an enemy, just imagine there's a giant walking over the mountain, and everything trembles. This is now a very physical one. what will we do? The first reaction will be we'll fear, tremble, and run. What is the right thing to do? Is to speak. When a situation appears that look like a giant, what do? You fear, you tremble, and you run, and you hide. No, you need to stand and speak. And we don't have to think about what we need to speak. It's in his word. That's why we study the Torah, so we can have the knowledge of what to say within situations. And he even said, if we don't know what to say, don't worry about it. His spirit will fill your mouth. And that's where the release of the language, the Pesach, comes in, because Pesach led to Shavuot, which is the receiving of the Spirit that gives us the strength and ability to speak, because he's a helper. And our power is in our mouths. Egypt is the place where the mouth is bound, and we need to get our voice back. Now, when we look at the spiritual symbolism of the human body, the head is where the mind is. It's unseen, that's spiritual. The body is the physical, where you can see every movement and what we do through our actions. The neck is where your voice box is. And that's the connection between the spiritual and the physical. That's also the symbolism of the tabernacle, where Yahweh spoke to Moses in the holy place. And Moses received the ability to speak. Whatever he heard, he spoke, and he wrote down. And now we can read what he wrote, and we can also speak. So we've got the ability to speak up against the giants in our lives, the giant situation. So it doesn't matter what the problem is, Yahweh is greater than that. But we have the key. He won't just sit there and say, oh, I feel so sorry for you. You're so afraid. You don't want to speak up. I'll do it on your behalf. No, he gave us the power. We need to release it. We've got part to play in this battle. It's not a passive battle. It's an active battle. So last week we touched on what should we do when we get exposed by and things happening in this world around us. Should we stand up against them? No, you don't have to stand up against it. You need to speak against them. Not on Facebook posting things. In the spiritual, in your room, when you pray, then you speak in the spiritual. You speak against the powers behind it. We never against flesh and blood. It doesn't help you speak against Trump or speaking against this one or Biden or whatever your belief system is. They're not the enemy. They're controlled by the enemy. We need to speak against the powers that sit behind them. The vile ones, or the vile power, or the Nachash that sit behind it all, which is the spirit of the Antichrist that's alive and well today. So the first mountain is Yahweh's authority that we need to understand where we're in. The second mountain is your authority. Now, if you don't take up authority, what will happen? That's basically where you submit to the self. The self is your little ego that protects you, that defines you, and you want to protect it as well, because it gives you who you are. You will listen to yourself. You'll follow all your dreams. You'll follow all your plans. And you will do everything in your power to sustain that and to elevate that. That's where the concept of selfishness comes from, the ego comes from, and what do you call it? Opposite of pride. Pride comes from humility. So the idea of the Amorite is the self, that is the ego, that is your worst enemy. The tsar, the enemy within, is cultivated by the self. And what we saw with tsar, it creates metzora, which is leprosy. It sustains that leprous state in your life, and it makes you sick. Imagine Yahweh having an army of lepers. One's arm's falling off, that one doesn't have fingers to shoot a bow, whatever, and he tried to attack the enemy with his little leprous army. We need to get out of that state. Stop being selfish or following the self. Submit under the authority of Yahweh, and then we overcome the third mountain, which is the Mount of Goat, the Goat Mountain, which is the mountain of Hasatan, his authority. Now, Satan has already been defeated. How does he get his power? We give him his power. Every single person who submit to his will, give him power to work through that person and attack someone else. So that's the authority level that I understood, that if someone is attacking me, whether it's a family member or whoever, the person is not the enemy. that person is just submitting under the third mountain. But the enemy sits behind that. I need to shield that person with the blood of Messiah so that they won't be used anymore. And then I speak against the enemy behind them to release them. And then I speak life and light, like we saw last time. That's one of the things that we need to say, and speak healing and whatever needs to happen from a spiritual level. So that's the 3 authority levels. And you can choose which one you submit to. Now, people in the world, the mystery of Satanism that most people don't understand, they call it the commandments of Satanism. And one of the commandments is to do your own will, do what you want. That's one of his commandments. What do we hear in music? Even though Frank Sinatra sang it, I'll do it my way. Follow the heart. That's another one. If you follow the heart, the self is protected. The emotional center, which got all the emotions that make you feel good. You're following the feeling that is elevating the Amorite power.
Also the thing of you can't love anyone else unless you love yourself first.
No, he said, lay down your life. You need to die and then follow him. If you die spiritually through or on a soul level, there's no room for the Amorite. Then you are an open channel for him to work through you. And then you can speak with power. But the self need to die. Because you're going to block him. Yeah, so that's just a beautiful picture of the 3 mountains. On the 3rd mountain, I just discovered this powerful symbolism found within this. All right, so healing of the lepers. So Chori, that's the same verse. So the Mount Goat or Mount Seir also linked to Yom Kippur, because we find 2 goats, 2 sacrifices, or a twofold solution to the problem which involved 2 sacrifices. Now, from the Yom Kippur, we know the one is the sacrifice, the other one is the Azazel, and the first one, which is the sacrifice that Yeshua fulfilled, is associated with the first goat, where the blood was taken into the Holy of Holies. That's the first solution to overcoming the authority of that 3rd mountain. The second solution involves a second sacrifice. And remember, sacrifice always involves fire. And what we discovered with fire, it's similar to the cycles of 7, because it translates something in the physical into a spiritual level where Yahweh can smell the sweet smell and aroma, which is not physical. So fire has the ability to translate something from a fallen state into a higher state. In the same way, a sacrifice was done to translate whatever you offer, which is your sin, your brokenness, everything you put on the animal, then that is burnt and translated. Now the cleansing process and the translation process takes place all within the sacrifice. But what happens with people who don't accept the sacrifice of Yahweh or the sacrificial system that's provided to us through Messiah? They have to become the sacrifice themselves, because sin asks for blood, because Yahweh said, when you sin, you will die. And life is in the blood. So if you don't have blood that's given to you on your behalf through an animal or through Yeshua, you need to give your own blood. And that's what we saw with Nadab and Abihu. They died themselves and they became a sacrifice. In the context of the atonement theme, they became an atonement offering. In the context of the end times, the judgment of the earth by fire is a massive atonement offering that will not only cleanse, but become a sweet smell unto Yahweh as he destroys his enemies. So the whole Great Tribulation with the judgment is an offering which relates to the second goat, which is the Azazel, which is linked to...
But it's still grace. We had a chat about this morning, because we know that all that is judge is only impurities. So whatever is left in anyone that's still holy or pure, that will stand before Yahweh.
Yeah.
So it's grace. Judgment is grace. It's not nothing other than grace. It's not like what the Catholics told us, killing and you're going to hell. It's just grace. It's cleansing, and it's a sacrifice unto Yahweh.
And what is sacrifice unto him? If you go to the brazen altar, what do you put on there? I've done good, I'll put that on. I'm a good boy. You put that. No, you put your sin on the altar. And then the sin is consumed and burned up. So the parts that's leprosy in you, the leper's clothes, his house, and whatever that was attached to him, that was burned. But the person was saved. In Luke, we read about everything you do that is not of him or inspired by him is like stubble and wood and all that. That will be burnt, but you will be saved but through fire. So the cleansing process, which we know as judgment, is similar to darkness versus light. Yahweh's purest, brightest light will cast away all darkness. Darkness cannot exist. It's the attribute of darkness and light. Yahweh's appearance will be the judgment that will drive away all darkness. And the symbolism we see is the fire that consumes. The symbolism we see is the fire that translates the sacrifice. Everything that is impure, that's connected to leprosy or thorn state, will be consumed because that's darkness. And when his pure holiness appears on this earth, there's no more room for any darkness because darkness can physically not exist where light is. And that is the basic concept of that. Any other comments or? All right, let's get into the rest of the words. El Paran means the palm of the caverns. That's where the cave dwellers dwelt. It consists of two words, which is ayil, aleph yod lamet. That means palm, ram. That's a sacrifice lintel. That's the top of a doorway. Oaks, mighty trees, mighty men. Now the ram was one of the things we read about when Abraham sacrificed or offered up Isaac. A ram was sacrificed in his place. If you think about a doorway to enter into the temple or the presence of Yahweh, a doorway consists of two supports, which is mezuzot. It's also the symbol of amunah, that also means support. That's translated as faith. And samech is also translated as support. But to get the doorway open, you need the two supports. And two supports are two truths that you believe. The concept of truth, you need two witnesses to stand for righteousness to be established. And you need something on the top to keep the doorway open so you can enter through. And that's the sacrificial system, the ram, that make the doorway possible for us to enter from darkness into light. So that's a bit of another way of looking at it. So the ayel, which is the ram, which is also connected to the palm, where these guys dwelt, is the grace that Yahweh provided the cave dwellers. They had the solution right there. They lived by it. It's tangible. It's possible. Every person in this world has the opportunity to access the ram, the sacrifice of Messiah. The ram is linked to the lamb, the Passover lamb, which is the entry point into the cycles of 7 through Pesach that will take you to Sukkot, where Yahweh's presence will come down and where we will enter into his house. So they all have the means to enter in because they live where that is present. Now this word is first found in Genesis 15 verse 9, where Yahweh instructed Abraham to get the animals for the covenant, which he is about to cup with Abraham, for the benefit of his generations that is to come. So that included the red heifer, a ram which is linked to Passover, a goat that's linked to Yom Kippur. All of them have to be 3 years old. The number 3 always linked to covenant, Yahweh's covenant. Then he had 2 birds, the dove and a pigeon. Last week we saw the 2 birds. It's also part of the offering and it's cleansing of the leper. So we see the symbolism of the sacrifices all linked up to this one animal called the ram or the ayil. It comes from the root word ul, which is aleph vav lamet. That means to twist, to be strong, your core strength, which is your abdominal muscles, that actually help you to stand upright. And if you stand upright, what's a spiritual term for that? It's righteousness. So without a core strength, without this ideal, without the ram, you cannot be righteous. You have no core muscles, no strength to be righteous. Only through him. And he makes us mighty men and women with power and authority. That's because of the ram and the lamb that we have access to that. And this is available to all the nations, all the cave dwellers. Now, where this word is first used, the word ul, is in context of the strong men that went into Babylon in 2 Kings 24:15. Now, the captivity in Babylon, as I said previously, is linked to the cave dwellers that are now bound in the dark chambers because of tsar, the enemy within, which give you metzora, which make you lepers. So it is us that is the problem within. We've got an external enemy that influences us with his flatteries, but he works through the power from within, which is the self that cause you to be bound up because you followed the flesh, you followed the heart, and you followed your own will. And that makes you a cave dweller in a dark chamber bound up. But what Yahweh did through the covenant, he made a release of that available through the sacrifice of Messiah, which is the ram, as well as the covenant he cut with Abraham. And all of this, if you take all those thoughts together, it gives you that whole concept of the gospel message, what Paul revealed to the people, taking us back to Father Abraham, linking that to righteousness and also to salvation, and connected to the blood of Messiah as well. So we see all the symbolism and the language in this picture here as well.
Are you going to discuss the ram, the word, or not?
It's good.
Okay. Can I just ask, where does the word El-Paran,
that's there. Chori is first found in Scripture in Genesis 14:6, where the Horites dwelt at Mount Seir unto El-Paran, which is by the wilderness. So that El-Paran, the root word of that links to is the word Al-Paran, which is the palm tree, at the caverns or the caves. So it's the palm trees at the caves, which is Al-Paran.
Okay.
And that's where the ram and the outcome of this is. The second part of this word, Paran, El-Paran, which is where the cave dwellers dwelt, its root word is parar. What did I write here? Anyway, there should be another resume. Anyway, that means beauty, to glorify, to beautify, to be adorned, to be honored. Isn't that fascinating to see that because of the covenant that was cut with Abraham, because of the sacrifice of the ram, of the doorway of faith and righteousness that's now being available, that we have the strength. But not only that, he beautifies us, he glorifies us, and we are adorned and honored. So he's taking us from a place of a dark cavern where we were bound, and he elevates us to this higher level through the work of Messiah. And that's a beautiful picture of the covenant and the first work of Messiah connected through this storyline. All right, so I'm not going to say anything more. I think I said everything already there. All right, so the reason for the Day of Atonement. So the Day of Atonement was basically as a result of the deaths of the two sons of Aaron. That's found in Leviticus 10. Now, who can remember what we read in Leviticus 10? Our first encounter with the book of Leviticus, we looked at the center of the Torah, which is the book of Leviticus. It's got an equal number of words, which is the same word that's repeated twice, Torosh. That means certainly search. And the verse that it's found in, Moses certainly searched for the goat for the sacrifice, which is in the context of atonement. So the Day of Atonement offering was instigated after the 5 sacrifices, or the sacrificial system was already in place. So the Day of Atonement dealt with sins that couldn't be dealt with the 5 sacrifices that's already in place. And he earnestly sought for the ram as if it was a crisis and he immediately needed a solution. That's the language that was used. And in this case, imagine for yourself, they went into the holy place, fire came down, devoured them. Imagine what Aaron might have felt like. They were terrified. And if you read what we read in scripture previously, it says we need to tremble at his word. I think Aaron knew what that meant, to tremble at his word. Because when Yahweh gives you an instruction and you don't do that, it can be life-threatening. If you want to approach Yahweh and you don't know the means how to approach him, it can be life-threatening because he's a consuming fire and he's holy. And that layer of protection was required now because something went wrong. And where did it go wrong?
In the temple.
In the temple, but in the leadership. The last week when we looked at leprosy, we saw the 3 types of leprosy. The one was when the person was fully covered with leprosy and they could still mingle with the people. That's symbol of a newborn baby that's fully covered with blood after birth. You just need to clean them up and they'll be all right. The second type of leprosy was when someone had spots. That meant that they were clean, but now they are contaminated. That was a bit more serious and they had to be taken out. That's someone who's backsliding into sin, and you need to remove them because they will contaminate the rest of the assembly. The third type, which was the worst one, was the leprosy of the head, or the leprosy of the mind. The head means leader or leadership, and the mind means corruption of the thoughts or doctrines, which is twisting the word of Yahweh. And that's the worst type of leprosy. And what happened in this event is that the leadership were corrupted, and Yahweh dealt with it very severely. And he, with his fire, he cleansed it before it corrupted the rest of the congregation. It's a matter of life and death for the existence of the rest of Israel to deal with corrupt leaders in a very serious way.
So it seems to be a parallel between the death of Aaron's sons and the death of Ananias and Sapphira at the establishment of the new.
It's the leadership that was corrupted.
He has to make a very clear.
Yeah, you had to clean the house before it corrupts the new ones coming in. Because that was the initial starting of filling the house. And even the initial members were seen as elders, of which those 2 were part of. And that's why it was so severe. Leprosy of the head. Don't play with fire. All right, so that's the context of this Torah portion, is that Yahweh had to deal with the leprosy that entered the leadership. And the function of the priesthood was to distinguish between clean tahara and unclean tumah. And they failed to do that. So what do we do today when you look at the world, what's happening with leadership? They call good bad and bad good. They confuse everything. It's a blurred line. Everything's gray. There's no black and white anymore. So there's massive leprosy of the head within the systems of authority that govern the world systems. And what we saw in Daniel 11, it's called the Kingdom of the South. And the vile one infiltrated a minority to control the whole kingdom and confuse everyone through the system of Babylon. What will Yahweh do with leprosy of the head? He cleanses it with fire, just like the example we see here. That's why the judgment that will come upon the earth is because of the seriousness of the leprous state within this world and the climax it reached. We see the same symbolism in the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, same pattern, where it was cleansed with fire, and we see the same today, seriousness. Now, the language that was used in the time of Sodom and Gomorrah, it said that the evil cried out to the heavens, and Yahweh himself came down to come and have a look before he judged. And then he extended grace through discussion through Abraham to see if there's righteous people and to remove them first. Now, we'll see the same pattern in the end times. He will not just come and destroy everything. He will extend grace first, and then he will come and cleanse. It's because he wants to see, and that's why he tarries, to come and see how many people he can get out of that system. It fits the language of Revelation that says, come out of her, my people. So you won't take part and be part of the judgments that will come upon her, which is specifically based on the religious system that has been infiltrated by the cancer of Babylon. All right, so the atonement, just putting out the picture. So fire came down, 2 dead bodies. What does 2 dead bodies mean in the tabernacle? Sanctuary has been defiled. They need to get the dead bodies out. And then they had to make atonement for the sanctuary as well as for the people to cleanse it. So atonement is always about purification or making things holy again so that Yahweh's presence can dwell. It's never being evil. Yahweh is not angry or evil. He's just holy. He's light. If there's darkness, it needs to be dealt with in a very gracious manner so that it will be the less lives lost, the least of lives lost. And that's the Father's heart. He wants to extend grace while he needs to cleanse it, because he cannot exist where the darkness is. He cannot exist where this leprous state is. But we are contaminated, so he made a plan, and that's what the Day of Atonement, or the sacrificial system that's found within the Yom Kippur offerings are embedded in order to extend grace to lepers. So we're going to see the mechanism of that in this study. All right, chapter 16 gives us a detail of the Day of Atonement in Yom Kippur, and the very essence of this day is about the necessity of shedding of innocent blood to cover sin, and that is extending grace. And that's why Yahweh chose to create this day. Now, the reason I call it this day, because atonement, if you look up the word, it's found within every single offering, because atonement can be translated as forgiveness or to cover. And there's a specific day that is made just for that. And that's what the Day of Atonement is about. It's all about the covering and the forgiveness, extending grace. So when we read about judgment, when the worldly people hear about judgment and all that, I think God is evil, he's cruel, he's angry. But when I read it now, I see the Father is gracious, because it's all about forgiveness and covering and extending grace. And that's the means. And those who won't accept that, they will be judged by it. And the judgment is actually the cleansing process. It's never intended to destroy any life. All right, so another interesting verse, and I think after this we'll have a break. It says, speak unto Aaron, thy brother, that he come not at all times into the holy place within the veil before the mercy seat, which is upon the ark, that he die not. I will appear in the cloud upon the mercy seat. Now, this is basically giving us a hint why his 2 sons died. They went into the Holy of Holies with strange fire, and it was not the appointed time. And the appointed time was not revealed yet, and that's why the urgency for instigating the Day of Atonement was so important to safeguard the priesthood from breaching this important commandment, where Yahweh safeguarded them against himself, with them not being prepared to come before him. Because when you read about the high priest going in, he has to go through a lot of cleansing, there's a lot of sacrifice and things happening for him to be purified enough to stand before Yahweh's presence and not being consumed by his holiness. Now, these 2 fellows were consumed by his holiness because they haven't followed the protocol of cleansing and preparation. And that's why Yahweh said that. Now, the language he used the word cloud and mercy seat. And the word cloud is the word anan. It comes from the word anan, which means covering and veil. Now, when we studied the book of Shemot, Exodus, we read about the veil. Can you remember what we said about the veil? This is a test.
How you went to?
Yeah, the veil between the holy place and holy holies. What's the purpose of the veil? What's the symbolism of the veil prophetically? The veil has 2 functions. It conceals and it reveals. on it was the picture of what was on the other side of the veil. It revealed, but it also concealed, it covered or protected us against what's behind the veil. But we had a picture of what was behind the veil. And the veil represents the one that was torn when the sacrifice was done. And that was Yeshua. Yeshua is the veil. He is the one that revealed the Father to us. He said, if you want to see the Father, look at me. If you see me, you see the Father. So he's revealing the Father, but he's also concealing the Father because he's the mediator. Without the mediator, we will die when we come before the presence. But the function of the veil is now being revealed through the cloud. So now we have a second veil. And this veil is on the mercy seat. So it's like two entry points into the presence of Yahweh. And the second veil is more about the picture we saw when Moses and the 70 elders went up the mountain. They ate with Elohim at the table. And then Moses went up into the cloud, the second veil, and spoke to Yahweh alone. That is the most holy place. And you need to be cleansed to enter into that space there. It's just interesting to see the two veils and the revealing and concealing of something higher. So we are in the process of getting more revelation of what is concealed behind the cloud, which is the second veil. And the cloud is symbolism of Yahweh's glory. We touched on that in the previous Torah portion when we talked about the restoration of the skin, which is the purification of fire, and the glory of Yahweh radiating from the skin, which is the word or, which is light, which used to be the word or, that means skin, the one spelled with an aleph, the other one with an ayin. So that's just an interesting connection there. All right, so any reflections or thoughts on what we discussed up to now?
No, we were talking about food.
No, not before that.
Oh,
Isn't there a connection that with Seir and Esau? Is it Esau or Ishmael?
Yeah, hairy.
that's
Hairy,
right.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the land he was given now, isn't it? Isn't that his
His
area
area?
that he was given? But where did Esau go?
Eden. No.
So,
Yes.
Eden, yeah, so, and
Yeah.
Seir is in Eden, isn't it? Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's that.
It means hairy, so
Yeah.
that's his skin, hairy skin.
And Petra is around there too, isn't there?
Yeah.
Is it
So just a comparison, this was in a previous Torah portion I've done. If you compare the skin of Jacob and the skin of Esau, Esau had a hairy skin, which is linked to the goat, is a link to the devil. And Jacob had the smooth skin, and the word for smooth is Eden. Yeah. So that's a difference between the two brothers. So the one is a bit more rough around the edges, and the other one tried to get back into Eden. The smoothness and Yahweh's ways. All right, so just reflecting on the animals. So we're going to basically just have two more topics. The last one will be about righteousness and holiness. That's part of the second Torah portion, Kedoshim. And we're going to finish off Yom Kippur and we're going to look at the animals that were sacrificed and a bit of background on the typical sins or the three types of sins and why these animals can deal with those sins, which the 5 sacrifices couldn't deal with. All right, so the Yom Kippur sacrifice was a bullock, a ram, and 2 goats. Bullock is the word par, that comes from the root word parar, that means to break up, cast off, cause to cease, make clean, defeat, disannul, disappoint, dissolve, divide, make of none effect, fail, frustrate, bring to naught, utterly made void. Now, if you think of that, you can think of that in 2 ways. You can think of that from a personal level. I need to go through all those things. That is what we call dying to the self. Well, I null, I become void. I basically cast off everything that's not of Yahweh. broken before him. That's a symbol of being humble before him. And the other one is when you look at what the work of Messiah did for us. He defeated the enemy. He broke it up. Everything ceased that was bad through his work, and he brought it to naught, and he made it utterly void. So that's the whole purpose of this bullock. That was basically the sacrifice or the sin offering made for the leadership or the priesthood and his household, which is also called a chatat offering. Now the ram was normally used for a burnt offering. Now the ram is the word ayil, as we discussed previously: strength, strong leader, strong support, an oak, other strong tree, mighty man, lintel, post, and it's also relating to righteousness and uprightness. And from this we see that from your brokenness can come righteousness, but only through the strength of Yahweh, because our righteousness is not our own, it's a gift. And if you receive righteousness through truth and acting on it through faith, that is what gives you the concept of righteousness in your life. It's not something you can do out of yourself. Now, righteousness, the definition of righteousness is to know what is right and to do what is right. And the knowledge of what is right is written in the Torah. Now, the Torah is also described by Paul as the knowledge of sin. So it tells you not only the things that are good, but also the things that are bad. It's like we're looking at the Torah from the point of view as the tree of knowledge of what is good and what is evil. Because we engage with that tree as humanity through Adam and Chava. And now we have a form of that which is the counter or to neutralize the effect of the tree, which is the Torah. And if you engage with the Torah, it will neutralize all the effects that the fruit had that they partook of. And that's why the Torah is the solution to the problem that will neutralize and annul the effect of the consequence of eating from the wrong tree, which is a defiled nature. So Yahweh's nature is also defined in the Torah. If you want to know Yahweh's character, you read the Torah, you know exactly what he likes, what he dislikes, how he is, how he acts. If we want to be like him, you read the Torah and you walk in his halakha, his ways. So that's why studying the Torah helps us to become after his kind. But the deep work needs to happen within you, because you can't mimic that. It's too complex. That's why his spirit needs to do a deep work within you, so that the change can come within, the energy come within, the passion and the zeal to want to do those things, and then you can naturally walk in his ways without trying to do it mechanically. That's a problem we had with our Jewish brothers in the past. They did it mechanically and their hearts were far from him. They did it just to be righteous, having a white cloak on, but internally they were dead bones. And that's what Yeshua basically accused them of, being white placid graves. And that's why you can't do the Torah mechanically, because you will be like a grave, have the appearance of whiteness, having a bit of radiance and whiteness shining for all your lingo and things you use.
But if you scratch, it comes off.
But if you're under pressure, just like when you squeeze a lemon, lemon juice comes out. So when you squeeze a Christian, the devil comes out, or a believer. So be mindful of that the purification process will reveal the bad nature first. You need to deal with that before the good nature will come out. And that's what this life is all about. It's the cycles of purification as we go through this life from the day you're born to the day you die. It's all about being transformed into his likeness. The two goats is the purification, which relates to the clean and unclean. Tahara is clean. That's the one goat that went into the holy place. The blood that was offered on the holy mercy seat. And the unclean goat was the tamei one, which was the Azazel, who took away sin into the world. And when John the Baptist saw Yeshua, he said, there's the lamb who take away the sin of the world. But the lamb was never earmarked to take away sin. It's the combination of the two goats that's a sacrifice that Yeshua fulfilled, the combination of the two functions represented by the two goats, where one is to offer up the blood to cover, the other one is to take away sin. And those two collectively represent the lamb. And when you look at the festivals cycle through the menorah pattern, Passover, unleavened bread links to Day of Atonement on this end, and all the sacrifice and offerings link right back to the Passover lamb. So the Passover lamb is the collective heading of these three sacrifices fulfilled. So when Yeshua died on the cross, he fulfilled not only the Passover lamb becoming the sin sacrifice, but specifically the sin sacrifice of the atonement offering. And the other half of the atonement offering was the second goat who took away sin. But on top of that was the bull, which is the chatat, or the sin offering, that he also took away, and then the ram, which was the one who dealt with the righteousness. All right, so the two goats, Azazel, we're going to look into that. So in the word Azazel, you see Ayin, Zayin, Aleph, Zayin, Lamed. So just from the word, you see a little pattern there with the Aleph in the middle. Each side of the Aleph, you've got two Zayins, that means sword or word. And then you get the Ayin and the Lamed. The Ayin and the Lamed makes the word Al, that means above, high, the highest, and most high. So that is the outcome of engaging with the Azazel, or where your sin is taken away, give you access to the Most High God. When you move inwards, you get the two Zions, which basically do the work within you. And in the center, you get the Aleph, that it also represents Yotei Vafei. If you add up the letters Yotei Vafei, it adds up 26. If you dissect the Aleph, it's made up of a Yod, and two Yods and a Vav, which also add up to 26. So the Aleph represents Yahweh himself. And you can see that the Azazel, the goat, is representing Yeshua, who was Yahweh, who took away the sin of the world. And he had the two Zions, which can be relating to the two-edged sword, also relate to the two tablets, which is the word of Yahweh on either side, which he used to fulfill that function. What's also interesting about the Ayin and the Aleph, at the bottom here, if you make up the word or with an Aleph, it's translated as glory. When you change the Aleph for an Ayin, it's the word or, that means skin and nakedness. So we are currently in a fallen state with an Ayin, which is the physical eye. And Yahweh wants to replace our eye with the Aleph that make us a glorious skin, which is his glory, his holiness shining from us. All right, so this is a recap from last week on leprosy. And this places leprosy in a slight different light. Now, leprosy is normally seen as something negative. And when you hear about a leper, oh no, they need to be moved out. We don't want to see them, just cast them out because they're filthy and they're sinful and they've done something bad. Don't want anything to do with them. But Yahweh has a different point of view of a leper. Specifically, Yeshua demonstrated that when he healed the lepers, he went to them in order to transform them and get them back into the camp. Now, where the brokenness come into is within the verse in Leviticus 15, verse 12, which talk about anyone that has been in contact with someone who's unclean, and even his earthen vessel need to be broken. Now, the earthen vessel is a representation of the human form, and we need to come broken before Yahweh before we can be elevated before him. And that brokenness is a form of humility that we read about in Isaiah 66, verse 1 to 2. Where he says, heaven is my throne, earth is my footstool. What is the house that I would build for me? And what is the place of my rest? All these things of my hand is made. And so all these things come to be, declares Yahweh. But this is the one whom I will look. He is who is humble and contrite in spirit and trembles at my word. So Yahweh says, I've made all these spectacular things, but the thing that will draw my attention is the one with a contrite spirit who trembles at my word. Now, if you look at that brokenness is basically linked to this, to be broken into pieces, that contrite spirit that will draw Yahweh's attention. Now, if you think about what the leper experienced when they expelled outside the city, they're isolated, they're all by themselves. There might have been a renowned person with authority, now they're nothing. And they go through processes in themselves and they break down their old self and they become nothing at the end of the day. Now, if you reach that point of brokenness, that's where Yahweh can pick you up again. And the purpose of being cast out of the city is for repentance. And that's where Paul said, those who are doing evil things, you need to hand them over to Satan so their souls might be saved. It's the same principle that you learn from moving people outside when they are in a leprous state. So what's fascinating, what we saw last week, is that the purification of the leper involved the same imagery that was used for the consecration of the priesthood, the blood on the ear, the right thumb, and the toe. And not only that, he also anointed their ear, their thumb, and their right toe, which is something that's not even done to the high priest. So it seems like the leper who's got a contrite spirit will be elevated above the level of the priesthood to restore them. And that is what Yahweh is doing with the people that will come out of the tribulation, who truly repented from their leprous state. He will elevate them, and they will be able to stand before his throne. He won't be able to count them. Have you ever wondered how those people can stand before his throne and not being consumed? They just came out of the tribulation. It's because of their brokenness, their repentance, and the fact that they now can be lifted up into the presence of Yahweh. Okay, so moving into the next one is just laying a foundation on the offerings of Yom Kippur and why we need that. Now we go back to Exodus 34, where Yahweh revealed his 13 attributes of grace to Moshe. And the time frame when he did that was right after they built the golden calf. Then he extended grace to them, and he revealed himself to them as well as his grace. Now what we see there, not only his attributes, but the last 4 has to do with forgiving iniquity, forgiving transgressions, forgiving sin, and then clearing and cleansing a guilty conscience. Now the word iniquity is the word avon, transgression is the word pesha, and sin is the word chatat. And those are the 3 main offenses, or 3 main sins that you get in the Torah. Now what's interesting is that chatat is translated as offense and sin, as well as sin sacrifice, and the root word means to miss the mark. Now the chatat offering and the asham offering were the sin offering and the guilt offering that were for unintentional sin. There was no sacrifice for intentional sin, and iniquity and transgression are intentional sins. So even instigating the 5 sacrifices within the sacrificial system did not fulfill the promise Yahweh gave in Exodus 34 up to the point of initiating the atonement offerings, because that's where he deals with the intentional sin, the avon and the pasha sacrifices.
Is that still applicable today, you reckon?
Well, we'll have a look at that, won't we? Yes. So I'll just give a bit more context on what iniquity and what transgressions actually mean. Now, iniquity is the word avon, that is deliberate offenses that is done with the will to challenge a standard or a law. You rebel against the standard and the law. And pasha offense is acts of rebellion against an authority figure like Yahweh. So the one you challenge his standards, you rebel against his standards. The other one you rebel against the person himself. So the one is a higher sin than the other one. And a chatat offering is an unintentional sin. Either you were still in practice, you didn't have the skills, you keep on missing the mark. The Torah actually is translated, the root word of Torah is yara, that means to learn how to shoot. So if you want to hit the bullseye, you need to keep on practicing. That's the unintentional sin. At least you're trying. The other 2 sins you do with the will, deliberately rebel against the standard. It can be breaking the laws of the land. Any authority figure, break their laws, break the laws of the company you work for, or even break the laws of the Torah. The other one, the Pesha offering, is where you come against the authorities and authority figures that Yahweh instigated, which can be your boss, the government system, and even Yahweh. So we need to be careful on not rebelling against authorities. We might not agree with them, but we can never rebel against it. So that answers the question last week. Should we stand up and come against this? No, we should not, because it's seen as rebellion from Yahweh's point of view, because all government systems, all authorities has been instigated by Yahweh to govern the people.
But how about if they don't, like today, you said earlier, what good is bad, what bad is good. So how...
Okay, so I'm going to break the speed limit because I don't like the government.
No, I'm not saying that. But
No. The example, so, you know, in the New Testament where they were brought, you know, they said, you answered, should we follow your law or Yahweh? So when the two clash,
yeah,
and you have a civil disobedience, that's different because we're the law of the
Yahweh's laws,
right?
yes.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about the law that was passed
But
last
if
week.
you just don't like the way,
was spoken.
you know, for example, I think we were talking about it with the
That's
masks,
not
for example. To wear a mask, we mightn't like it.
But
but there's no Torah law that you're breaking or that the law is you, so you have to obey. We've been put under that authority, so we wear it.
Yeah, so the question is
that,
do I want to get in trouble for something stupid?
Yeah.
I'm being chucked in jail and my family will suffer because I want to prove a point, I'm going to rebel against this?
Yeah.
Or is it sensible for the sake of your family not to do foolish things, even though the requirement is foolish, but it doesn't break the Torah? So you comply for the sake of peace. We should seek peace always, not to rebel against stupid things. But if they come against and say, you shall not pray or do this or do that, it's against the Torah. I will not comply to that one because Yahweh's Torah is higher than that.
Better to say if you're being arrested and put in jail for something really important according to Torah than something stupid.
Yeah. So persecution will come where they come against the covenant and the covenant people. They will deliberately force you to break the Torah. That's not on. But then the persecution will warrant you going to jail, which is fine. At least you do it for Yahweh, not for your own little.
Now here's one that's current. Do not forsake the assembling of yourselves together, as the day approaches. So, is it right for congregations to ignore the law of the land in that context?
Or people meet in homes.
Well, they can still meet, but just
Yeah.
not by breaking those rules.
If you can
still get
still legally get together.
And that's not wrong.
So small groups is safe, but larger assemblies is not.
You just have to redefine what you think is.
So that's where we need to get wisdom and see what will the best outcome be for the kingdom if I try and rebel. I'm going to get the biggest meeting together to show them a thing or two and everybody get in trouble, or at least you can meet in smaller groups and still get the message shared. That's more beneficial to the kingdom than to try and rebel against something to show a point that I don't agree, because you don't change anything except your own consequence. Avon is translated as sin, mischief, fault, and to punish. Comes from the word ava, that means to bend, to pervert, to twist, and to distort. This word is first found in scripture. No, it's not. No, in Genesis 4:13, where Cain said, my punishment, Avon, is greater than I can bear. Nasa, and Nasa, bear, is the same word for forgiving. And that is the word that's used in Exodus 34, where Yahweh said, keep the mercy of 1,000, forgiving Nasa, the iniquity. So he's going to bear the iniquity. So that's a promise he gave in Exodus 34 that could never be fulfilled by the 5 sacrifices we were introduced when we started Leviticus. So how will he bear the sins of those doing iniquity and transgression other than the 5 sacrifices? Because it's impossible, because they are deliberate sins. So we're going to look at that as we study this. Genesis, the second occurrence of this word is found in Genesis 15:16, where it says that Yahweh told Abraham, in the 4th generation of the iniquity Avon of the Amorites is not yet complete. So that means that they had to wait till the iniquity of the Amorites came to fulfillment, and they will be 400 years in captivity, and then they will be released from Egypt. So what we see there in the mix of the language, we see the word Egypt, we see captivity and into slaves. We also see the Amorites. I mean, what do we learn about the Amorites? It's the iniquity of the Amorites that need to be complete. So the fulfillment of people having the authority in themselves, worshipping themselves as their own, gods. I'm the God of sitting on my throne of my life, and I will rule my life my way. That is the Amorite in control. And that fulfillment, do you think we're at that point of that fulfillment of that came into being in our time? Most definitely. So we will be in bondage until the time where this is complete, and then the Exodus will take place. Now, if we follow the pattern of the Exodus, we see a similar pattern of the greater Exodus. They both involved leaving a system. The first one was Egypt. The second one is Babylon. They crossed the Red Sea. They're going to cross the Jordan. Jordan means river of judgment. And that is the Great Tribulation. So we will go through the second Exodus, pass through the Jordan before we can enter into the Promised Land. So we see the same symbolism there of the self that will come to fulfillment, and then judgment will come. And we will be in bondage until that time of that means. In the same way, when the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah cried out to heaven, Yahweh came down. So it's the consequences of this leprous state that will get Yahweh's attention. And then he will bring down judgment. So it's the evil that will pull down judgment upon the earth. And that's what this whole context is about. All right. Avon, if you look at the word itself, it's an ayin and a vav and a nun. Who wants to take a stab at that? In the middle of every word, if you look at the little menorah pattern, 3 branches, the middle one is the most important one. The other branches support the middle one. The middle one has the vav. Vav means 6. It's also the number of man. So vav means man. On the one hand, we have the ayin. On the other one, we have the nun. Nun means seed or your nature. And the ayin is what we see in the garden. The eye corrupted man, and the eye corrupted man's seed. And that's the nature of the sin. It corrupts your seed through the eye. What you covet. If you look at the 10 Commandments, the last one, which is the furthest away from Yahweh, which is the first one where he declared himself, I am Yahweh your Elohim, who led you out of Egypt, versus you shall not covet. So the worst thing you can do that's the furthest away from Yahweh is to covet, and we covet through our eyes. What we see, we want. And covetousness is the foundation for most sins. If you covet, you steal. If you covet, you commit adultery. If you covet, you steal. Whatever. You murder. Yeah, so all of those things are driven by this desire of the eye. So we need to remove the eye. Shua said if your eye causes trouble, plug it out, so at least you will be safe. Now we're going to remove the iron in a moment and see what it means from this. So that is just to demonstrate the corruption of the sin. Now, where the corruption of the sin comes in, where you rebel against the law. So what was the first commandment that man broke? The first ever commandment?
Idolatry.
No. It happened in the garden. What was the standard that was broken, that was challenged? Yahweh said, do not eat from this tree. You shall not eat from this tree. What do? I shall eat from this tree. They challenged the standard. They ate from that tree and they fell. Their seed were corrupted because of the eye. And man was corrupted and fell into a low nature. So it all comes into play if you look at the nature of the sin and why it is such a critical sin, because it caused us to fall. All right, so Exodus 34, we see the transgression, which is the next one, Pesach, which is Peshin Ayin. Pesach is translated as transgression, acts of rebellion, and this is against the authority figure like Yahweh. We see the same letter. We see the ayin in there as well. So the ayin is the root of this sin as well. We see the pei that's now being corrupted. Pei means mouth. And the mouth when that is corrupted, we do evil speech. One example we looked at last week is that Miriam spoke against Moshe and she got leprosy. So evil speech leads to leprous state. So whatever we say, now if you ever think about or reflect back after every day, what you have said that day, is there anything that you've said that could cause you to become leprous? Even negative speech, we saw that last week. Complaining is an unclean state that makes you leprous. Speaking against someone is a leprous state. Slandering is a leprous state. Speaking lies also causes leprosy. So everything that we speak causes us to be corrupted as well. And this is rebellion against an authority figure. And we normally speak it out. We proclaim that I don't like this person. I will go against this person. It's something you influence other people. And now that's why this is a serious one. The other thing that we see is that in the middle we have a shin. Shin means fire. Now that basically gives us an idea that the consequences of the sin will cause you a bit of a heated situation or not pleasant situation or consequences to come upon you. And we're going to see that in a moment. What does that mean? So if we remove the iron from the word pasha, we get the word pash. That means folly, weakness, stupidity, and disintegrate. So we sin because of weakness, we sin because of stupidity, and this sin is basically the sin of rebellion. Now the gematria of pash, pashin, is 380, and that means breach, as in a breech baby, tongue, language, slander, crossroad, parting ways, Egypt, which is sin and bondage, to be deserted, to desolate, to be stunned, to crush, to oppress, violent one, plunder, to tear apart, to break off, heavy dark cloud, thick darkness, devastated, deserted, desolate, be stunned, fragment, and broken. So from this we see all the consequences of committing the sin, which is the fire in your life. Now, thick darkness, it can also be seen as depression. And you will experience all these bad things that will come upon you. Now, I've got the three there that's quite interesting. He-goat, knife, and drop-off. Who can make a connection with that? Right?
Or maybe different connection.
So there's
the Yom Kippur goat.
Yeah, so there's one goat with two consequences, or two goats, each with a consequence. So one is dropped off. He got the cliff, and the other one got the knife. And actually in the dictionary it says he goat twice, and then you see the others. So there's two forms of that. So it's interesting to see the connection to Pesach. We also find the solution to the problem to take away the consequences of the sin. I'm going to jump a bit forward. Now, if you do an unintentional sin and you need to bear the consequences, there were quite regular sin sacrifices conducted in the temple. So you could deal with your sin on a regular basis.
On a daily basis, really.
But intentional sin, there was only one sacrifice that could take care of it. And that happened once a year. And when you see the severe consequences, imagine the people who committed that sin, who start to get the consequences, they will be longing for the atonement offering to release them from the suffering of this fire burning within them upon their lives. Now, I can relate to this because I went through a lot of consequences because of sin that stays with you for a long time. It's not something that disappears. There's no quick fix. And you can say, I'm going to pray a prayer, ask Jesus to forgive me, and boom, everything's happy and sweet. It takes a few cycles, and you need to have the understanding on how to deal with this before you can get released from the pain of this sin that comes upon you. And this consequence both relates to the two intentional sins where you had the choice to do it or not to do it. Whether you had the knowledge is a different story. So that's just something interesting.
Because I was always wondering, I was always saying to Philip, because I had Melissa and Akira from a previous relationship before Philip. And when I came, because I was an atheist before I came to faith, and when I came to faith, they were saying, yeah, your sins are immediately removed from you. And I thought, no, it's not. I've got the consequences of my previous life. Not that they are any burden to me, but that's a consequence of my previous life. And I'm carrying it, and everybody knows about it. How about somebody that sins still intentionally, but nobody can see it? How does that work for consequence? Because I'm carrying a consequence. So we had a interesting discussion about that, and it actually came out in the Torah portion. So you will still carry the consequence of intentional sin, and that's why it's important for us to still celebrate Yom Kippur. Although it's forgiven, you carry consequences.
But there's also generational consequences.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
It doesn't. It's not
A once-off thing that goes away.
Otherwise, we wouldn't, as believers, be so quick to try to do the right thing.
Exactly.
If it was just there was no consequence, then you would just sin intentionally all the time.
Exactly.
Because that's your human nature.
That is human
That's
nature.
that's what your flesh wants
That's
to
what
do.
you do.
Yeah.
It's when you're, oh, sorry.
You're right.
I was just going to say, when you're, before you're at your transformation, when you're in a sinful state, and your sin affects others in your life, and then you come to the Lord and you're forgiven and work out. It's the hard thing is carrying the burden of the consequences you'll see. I often think of David, with David when he I forget what he did. I mean, all the stuff he did, and then his punishment, he had to choose one of three, and he chose he said, I choose what Yahweh gives me, because was it the plague for 3 days or something, and it killed a whole lot of people, but then he's got to carry that for
the rest of his life. And also his son was after him.
and his son from Bathsheba, and it's and
Yeah,
yet
you still
he's a
carry
man
that.
after God's own heart.
Yeah, and he could not build the temple because he had blood on his hands.
the whole thing with Absalom. And other kids as well.
It's hard to carry
the whole thing was a
that
mess.
burden, even though you're saved and you're, it's hard. It's a hard burden to carry.
And if you read his Psalms, they're so beautiful. You can see he's an anointed man of God, the beloved. And he's messed up so bad, and all the consequences, you can just see it in his life following
But he
him.
was he had a humble heart, and
Yeah, we're going to look at Psalm 51, which is the prayer for the sinner's prayer, basically, Psalm 51.
I was thinking of Paul this week with Stephen, how.
Yeah, the thorn in his flesh, I think, was basically the sins he committed with his will and the consequences that followed him, that ate him up, that burn inside of him constantly. The memory of that consumes you.
Well, the other thing, the obvious thing with Paul is there were consequences for the sins he committed. Now, as you sow, so shall you reap.
Yes.
God allowed him to go through the things that he'd inflicted on other people as a means of
to promote the kingdom. Then
He used that to make sure his character remained within the parameters he needed. That's interesting, isn't it? Because Yeshua then made it so that the consequences of our iniquity no longer separates us from heaven, but we still bear the consequences here on
Of
earth.
your sin.
But the consequences actually shape your character.
You won't die. You
That's
won't
right,
die,
because-
but you're gonna.
And that's exampled by Israel with Levi and Simeon.
Mm.
Levi chose to repent and serve Yah, and Simeon did not. Levi, whilst consequences and the curse was to be scattered amongst Israel, still became the Cohen,
Yeah.
whereas Simeon did not.
Because their characters were shaped because of their iniquity.
So Yah took the curse and turned it into a blessing, whereas Simeon remained.
Yahweh hits a perfect shot with a crooked stick.
So Aaron's right, isn't it? Aaron's right. Aaron's right was proof that Aaron was in leadership. It was also the branch that was broken off a living tree and it was dead, and he caused it to grow. And Israel had been broken off from the dream, or that generation from the dream of entering into the promised land. And Yah showed that I will still cause you to bloom even though you've been broken off from this.
Supernatural life.
Perfect.
And that's His Spirit empowering the deadness within us, the brokenness of the character. He resurrects us. And then He can perfectly flow through us because we don't stand in the way anymore. And if you read David's Psalms, they're so prophetic because he was such a broken man. Look at Paul's letters, there was such brilliance because he was such a broken man. None of them were, born, perfect and lived a perfect life when he became a preacher. It's always the ones who went through the traps first, who sinned and committed all things, that became the great men. Not to say that you should commit sin in order to become great, but Yahweh uses the brokenness and experience of the effect and the cause of the sins that we do to benefit and help others as well.
I was reading this morning just something on Facebook where it says everyone has a story, and if you just listen, everyone's got a story that will bring you to tears, but if you listen, some of these stories will bring you to your knees. Nobody's got a free ride.
And some people will hear the story and they will treat you like a leper. Different people will react differently. But even if you have leprosy, to have that brokenness give you access to be elevated again. That's the key, because we all sin.
You just got to take the consequences of Adam eating wrong fruit.
Yes.
Imagine their brokenness, knowing that the rest of humanity for thousands of years will suffer because of my covetousness. Everybody will love Noah and will hate Eve. So as I said, the word Parashah Gematria there, he-goat knife drop off, links to the 2 goats of the atonement offering at Yom Kippur. The next offering, which was another animal that was sacrificed, was the bullock that we looked at, which is the word par, that means strength, ox, and it's got the gematria of 280. So we've got 100 difference between the 2 numbers. We're going to look at that in a moment. So 280 has got the meaning bound, wild ass, or ass, wild ass, ruin, or you can say I ruined my life by doing this stupid thing. Rough place, snares, plots. You will stumble along and be tripped up by all the little traps you set for yourself in the past. Bitterness, anguish, quiver, to tremble, to fear, deprived from protection. This one is very interesting. To be deprived from protection. Now, if you think about it, that Yahweh's covering is over us. If we read Psalm 91, it says we're sitting under His wings, under His shadow. If we commit this deliberate sin, the covering lifts, and guess what? We're now exposed to the elements of the enemy. That's one reason why bad things happen to good people. Even though they're good people, they mess up. And then the covering lifts, and then things happen to them. Bad things happen to them because of their stupidity. And to be cut off. That's a term that's used for someone sinning to be cut off. It's also the context of a leper that's been cut off. He's cast outside of the city and he need to be dealt with outside. And those meanings of 280 perfectly harmonize with the meanings of 380, which is the gematria of Pash, which comes from Pasha. It's all about anguish, suffering, and all the dark clouds and things that come over us because of our rebellion against Yahweh and his authority and his standards. Now, looking at the positive side, the gematria of 380 has positive meanings connected to the two goats. That means fragment, broken, he-goat, knife, and drop off. I added the fragment and brokenness there because that is the means to access the sacrifices of the two goats. And that brokenness and fragmented spirit and the broken heart is basically what we know as true repentance, to have a contrite spirit before Yahweh. And then we have access to that. And then the rest will follow: recompense, deliverance, salvation, rescue, safety, support, goldsmith, my garments, and thanks, my thanks. So all of those things come through the sacrifice of the two goats: salvation, safety. And the goldsmith one, as we looked at previously when we discussed the tabernacle with the 2 shekels, 2.5 shekels, that the silver, when you melt that, impurities come to the surface. And when you scrape it off, it's got a beautiful surface where the goldsmith or the silversmith can see its reflection. Now the same with the goldsmith, but gold is the color of deity and royalty. And so that basically tells us that we elevated to the God state or royal state in context of the bride. A beautiful link there. Now, 280 also have positive meanings, which is from the word bullock or par. That means waking up, watchful, shepherd, friendly pasture, to be lifted up and exalted. Now, when you watch a lot of YouTube people say, wake up, people, you need to see this, see that. It's having that understanding of what's happening around you to make the connection to where we are in the prophetic timeline. That's that awakened state where we need. And the book of Revelation said, come out of her, my people. It's only the ones that are awakened that will respond to that call to come out of the system. Those who are blinded will still be entrapped and stay trapped until the time of tribulation. Hopefully the shaking will be large enough so they will come out of their caves of brokenness and bondage and be released from that.
So it's interesting that the woke ones are the ones that are actually asleep, blind.
Yeah. And the other thing we can connect here is watchmen, to be watchmen, and to see what's in the word, see what's happening around us, and then reflect on that and reveal that to others as well. So those links perfectly with the sacrificial system. The other thing about the Yom Kippur offerings, if you think about the greatest sin that was ever committed was when they killed the Son of God. That's the greatest sin ever committed. But the greatest sacrifice ever committed was the sacrifice of Yeshua that's linked to the Yom Kippur offerings. Because those are the sacrifices that could deal with intentional sin, rebellion against his standard, his covenant, and rebellion against him. That's the only sacrifices. And that's happening once a year in the time of the temple. But now we don't have a temple, now we're all in trouble. So what do we do?
What do we do?
What do we do? What are you going to do?
I don't know. Tell me.
Yeshua, I'm going to show you the little picture at the bottom as well. The sacrificial lamb, I might as well do it now, entered the house on the 10th of Nisan. Yom Kippur is on the 10th of Tishri. So the time frame connects the lamb with the sacrifices that happened on Yom Kippur, which is the collective sacrifice consisting of the ram, the bull, and 2 goats. So if you look at the Passover lamb, you see the ram, the bull, and the 2 goats. And that's what John the Baptist saw. Take away the sin, which is the bullock. He leads to righteousness, that's a ram. And then the blood that went into the temple, which is Yeshua's blood, is the one goat. And then the sin that's far removed as the east from the west, that's the Azazel goat. So everything Yeshua did collectively culminate around these animals that were sacrificed on the day that's made to atone or to forgive. And that day was fulfilled the same time frame when Yeshua died on the cross during his first coming, through the connection of the menorah pattern and through the connection of Nisan and Tishri. And what happened? The other thing that's evident here is that unleavened bread, 7-day period. We read in 3 or 4 Torah portions ago that the priesthood went into the temple to be consecrated for 7 days, and they ate unleavened bread. So unleavened bread basically give us the idea of consecration of the priesthood. And consecration of the priesthood links to preparation as well, because they had to prepare themselves for 7 days before the temple could be initiated and the glory of Yahweh filled the temple. So it's all about preparation. And I say that every time we go to a festival. The festival is one thing, but the preparation for the festival is the most important thing. Because if you don't prepare, you won't have a feast. If you don't put an effort in, you will have a wash down festival that won't be unto Yahweh, glorious unto Yahweh. So do your best to prepare, because you do it unto the king. It's like Esther who prepared herself to come before the king. We should have that mentality whenever we go into the festival, to have the same preparation. Now we're going to prepare to see the King of Kings, which is the day of judgment, atonement, the birth, and the big offering. We need to put in more effort from ourselves in order to prepare, and that's a daily living. That's what holiness is all about. It's all about that preparation. And we're going to look at the connection of holiness to what we need to do and what we can do to make sure that the holiness is healthy and intact. Now, after that, we get Shemini Azeret, the 8th day. And number 8 means new beginnings, which has to do with the end of the cycles of 7, which is to do with the purification. So we get the preparation, purification that leads to new beginnings, which is the new birth into the higher state, which man fell from. All right, so the difference between 280 and 380 is 100, and that's the difference when you remove the iron from Pesach. So 100 has the gematria that's the following.
We came to that with gematria because Philip was telling me that there's a difference of exactly 100 between the two words. And then I thought, but that must mean something. That must be some kind of a bridge between those two words. 100, only 100. What is that?
And what's fascinating about this gematria, I think there's 2 negative meanings. I haven't showed them yet. The rest is positive.
All the gematria of 100, all just positive words.
And it means son of strength, yoke, use the right hand, and ransom. Now I made them red because that's to do with the sacrifice of Yeshua. Then Yahweh knows, Yahweh has adorned, he will establish. Hedge, that's the word for protection. Throat, to speak, that's a release of speech. Beauty, stunning, to leap, dance, spring. He will reign, who is like Elohim.
Amazing, isn't it?
Now that who is like Elohim reflect back on the Torah portion when we saw the 70 elders or the 74 men who went up before Yahweh. And they met with the council of Elohim. And they sat around the table. And that's supported by Psalm 82 as well, where they say that the Elohim ruled over Elohim and made judgments upon Elohim, which are the gods of the earth. And we as the royal priesthood, the kingdom of priests, have access to that table, which is represented by the table of showbread, to enter into that authority level and to reign like Elohim. That's that who is like Elohim. So we become like Elohim in an authority figure on that level. We're not on the glorious level, the Holy of Holies, where we enter into the presence of Yahweh. We can never be like him, but we can sit at the table of his counsel to rule over nations. And we also see that language in Revelation, that you will rule over nations. That's from that authority level. And we have that authority now as the kingdom of priests. And from that authority level, you can speak against the enemy, against the Amorites. You can speak life into the life of loved ones. You can break the power over the control that the enemy has over your life, loved ones. You can come against the authorities that sit behind the government systems and the political systems and all that. We have the authority on that level that's far surpassing the authority of this world or the principalities and powers of the air. That's our authority, and we need to understand that as a body of Messiah to rule with him and to overcome during this terrible time that's coming. All right, so I think I've done all of that. This is basically what I already mentioned, is desperately seeking, dorosh darash, the goat of the atonement. That was Moses' one greatest thing to search. Now, if we say, oh, we're going to study the Torah, what's your attitude towards that? What are you searching? What do you want in it? Do you just read it for entertainment? Or are you really searching something because I need something that will atone for me? We're desperately in need of atonement. So if you desperately search, Dorosh Darash, it said that Moses was looking for the ram. He Dorosh Darash, the ram. We saw that the ram is linked to righteousness, to the lintel, and to the two pillars of faith, which connects to the work of Messiah as the Passover lamb and all the sacrifices within Yom Kippur. So even in the absence of the temple, Messiah, Yeshua, is our only hope to atone for us. There's nothing on this earth that can take away the consequences of your rebellion. You will suffer without him. And we that know him need to understand his cycles. So coming towards every Yom Kippur, be mindful of that. What have I done this year that was rebellious? And bring that before him in a state of brokenness, so he can release you for the consequences that will follow you the next year if you don't do that. And it will just compound and pile up years after years of rubbish and consequences that will sit upon you until the point of total annihilation and destruction. So we have a chance in a cyclical way to deal with things we've done in the past. Cyclical. What did I say?
Cyclical.
Very cyclical sin if you don't deal with it. We need to unstick it. So this once of prayer, oh, Jesus, save me, and I'm covered by your blood, I'm ready to go, is a very plastic, disrespectful, ignorant kind of prayer. You need to understand the depth of Yahweh's work and the timing of his work and the seriousness what you do around Yom Kippur. So last year we did Yom Kippur. I can't really remember what did we do. We did pray for the nations and for people.
Oh yeah, I wasn't there. Yeah. You went up to a high place.
We had the
Wrote the scriptures on stones.
We took stones that was not
on the brook.
defiled by man. We wrote Yahweh's names, different names on it. We went to all the high places or entry points within this area, and we placed them opposite the entry points, whether it's a roadway. And then we claimed the souls of the people who pass through that to come into the kingdom. And after that, hell broke loose.
Yes.
But in saying all of that, there are people who came in as well. There are people who got the awakening. Slowly but steadily, that will work through having that understanding and understanding the authority thereof. Now, there's a little warning here that we need to understand. Have you ever wondered why the people in the world can sin and they don't really have bad consequences? It's like when you sin, you're all right, but as soon as you give your heart to Yeshua, then everything goes south.
Yeah,
It's
but
because
we
you
want
now
them to
know.
subscribe to the covenant, so they're not bound by those rules.
So from Yahweh's point of view, they do chatato, sin. Unintentional because they don't know any better. If you start searching the scripture,
You know.
now it's dangerous because now you know if you now break that same thing, you're
It's-
rebelling against his
yeah,
standard
willingly.
and you're indirectly rebelling against him, and severe consequences will come upon you. So beware. That's why we tremble at his word. We
That's why
don't.
they killed the prophets. They don't want to hear.
I don't want to
because
hear. They understood that. Ignorance is bliss. At least I will be classed as ignorant and not have the severe consequences. So that's why it says, you that teach, you'll get a greater judgment. Why? Because you know more.
And that was the one with the ark when the Philistines took it and they looked at it and they had it, and all that happened was Dagon fell over, although they got sick, didn't they?
But they got blessed as well. Once the house was blessed.
And they sent it back to Israel and they opened the ark, and how many thousands of people died?
Yeah, the one who touched it died.
Yeah, heaps of people died as a result because they knew they shouldn't have been doing that.
So it's,
I was saying to Philip, so, you know, I can remember when we were still in the church, there was a wave of, oh, you can just jump onto God's lap and sit there and, you know, and I thought, oh my gosh, no, you can't do that. Just the way you are. You can just hop onto his lap and no, you can't.
There's a lot of misunderstanding.
Misunderstanding.
Without understanding the Torah, you don't understand his
Yes, you
holiness.
don't.
And you don't really understand the work that Yeshua has done. I haven't, yeah, and you know, and it just never, a lot of it didn't make sense.
Yes.
If you understand mankind as a cancer in God's creation, then the obvious thing for God to do is just
yeah, because they were
completely
in a
wipe
leprous
out.
state, so he just wanted to cleanse them. Yeah, they were in a leprous state. And in the time of Moses, he just wanted to take him out and go through Moses and start anew and afresh. What saved him was the covenant, which is his Torah, basically. So there's a lot of grace in his Torah. The other thing that we also can learn from the iron is that we see the iron in the commandment of the titi. It's twofold. Its purpose is twofold. The one is to remind you to do his commandments. The other one is that it says, remember his commandments of Yahweh and do them, and that you seek not after your own heart and your own eyes. So it's a reminder against covetousness, against wanting things. That's to do with the self, but it can also lead to these other sins that's got the two irons in them, the avon and pasha, that can lead to serious consequences. So the tzitzi is a reminder of us to tremble at his word and take him serious, because we covenant people, we know better.
And you're reminded by using your eyes, because you look at them to
yeah, you see them. The iron is focused now. Now you need to fill your eyes with Yahweh's things, not with the world's things.
And so is the mezuzah. Because you see it when you go out and you see it when you come in.
Yeah, it's a reminder of the commandments and that you are a bond servant. So Psalm 51 are labeled the sinner's prayer, where David prayed after he willingly killed someone and took that person's wife. Psalm 51 is a beautiful song by Steve Green. Have you heard that? It's a song by Steve Green.
Steve Green.
I've heard of Steve Green, but I haven't heard that song.
Oh, it's not Steve Green, it's another Green.
Keith Green.
Keith Green.
Yes.
Keith Green.
That's the guy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
What does he sing?
He's
Does he
singing
sing
Psalm 51. I'm not going to sing it to you now.
Yeah.
Why not?
No. So it says, have mercy on me, O Elohim, according to your loving kindness, according to your abundance of your compassion. Blot out my transgressions, which is Pesach. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity, Avon, and cleanse me from my sin, Chatat. For I acknowledge my transgression, my sin is ever before me. Create in me a clean heart, O Elohim, and renew a right spirit within me. That's the phrase of the song. Do not cast me away from your presence, and do not take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore me to me the joy of your salvation. Uphold me with your generous spirit.
Yeah.
So such beautiful words came from a place of brokenness. Not because things went well, because he stuffed up.
And suffered the consequences for the rest of his life.
Yeah, yeah. So.
Oh, I can actually hear Edward's voice.
Yeah. All right, now we're going to shift gears a bit. The reason I did this now is because of all the fascinating things I saw in the Gematria. And I actually had a thought driving up here, and I just thought to myself, are you guys familiar with the Bible code on how that works? There's another level to the Bible code that exists within the numbers system. Now imagine if you take every word in the Torah and you translate every word to its Gematria number. And you place all those numbers and you squish them in there, there's no spaces. And you apply the sequencing techniques that they apply to the text, to the numbers. What will be hidden within that layer?
I was thinking, do it. I want to know.
So that's from a mathematical point of view. You can engage with the Torah and maybe get things out of there.
Deeper, yeah.
Because the Torah is supernaturally inspired. It will mean something. So I'm applying similar technique here, but on a very basic level, just looking at the Gematria of each one of those animals and only look at their positive meanings to get the outcome of what benefit we will get from that sacrifice, and also to understand the power behind the sacrifice that's happening in the spiritual realm that's now physically available to us through the symbols of these animals and what Yahweh is giving us. So there's a lot of wisdom embedded behind things that he says and do. So the bull one, we already looked at Gematria 280s, to waking up, watchful shepherd, friendly pasture, which is to do with Yeshua, his word, to be lifted up and exalted. So the atonement offering is there to lift us up and to exalt us. That's to do with the resurrection component of the work of Messiah. So the symbol of the mikvah, where you are resurrected into a newness of life, that's that lifted up and exalted. And it's to do with the work of the shepherd of Messiah, which links to the sin offering component of his work, which relates to his blood. Now, ram, ayil, means strength, strong leader, strong support, oak, strong tree, mighty man, lintel, post, and righteous or upright. It's the number 41 that means strength, willingness, new beginning, mother, fertile, her own tent, territory, to be joined, majesty of Elohim. So with this, we see the more mature level. It's like the motherhood we saw previously in the previous Torah portions had to do with the priesthood, nurturing the people in the outer court to help them to grow up into maturity so they can become part of the priesthood as well. And being in the priesthood, you've got the responsibility to look after the new babies coming in, like a mother look after the baby after they're born. And that's the nurturing aspect of the priesthood. And we see the same language with the ram here. And we see your own tent. So that relates to little fellowships and assemblies where there's people who nurture people all across. And it's small little tents where that work happens. And they're all joined together to the majesty of Elohim. We see the word strength constantly. We saw that with the par, which means strength. We see that also with ram, that also means strength. And also the Gematria of ram means strength as well. So there's a lot of strength, or the concept of strength, which is the ox, which relates to the Aleph, which relates to Yahweh. So he's in all of them. Goat is the word shahir. It's the number 580. That means to break in pieces, to do with brokenness. Choice, solution, to prevail, to overcome, taken away. Hedge, you see the concept of a hedge again. And in previous studies, we looked at the word thorn, which means hedge, which is the word shamar. And the word picture of shamar relates to a shepherd with his sheep at nighttime, where he built a thorny hedge. And the resh, which is on the left in the physical, is a symbol of the head or the leader or the shepherd. Inside the shamar or the hedge, you get the shin and the mem, which is a picture of the word and the spirit. And the fire of the spirit gives light within the shamar, cast out the darkness which is on the outside. And the mem you can relate to in the light of the spirit. And that's the hedge or the safe place of Yahweh's people. And the shepherds sleep in the entrance of that. On the outside, there's darkness. The enemy is there. You're exposed. If it says you lose your protection, you're actually outside of the shamar. And the wild animals are there to taunt you and haunt you. What's also evident here is that the hedge is made of thorns. And that's the concept of the Torah. There's consequences. If you test the boundaries, you'll be stung by the boundaries. You'll get pricked and you'll bleed. And that's what the consequences are. The more you run into it with force, you do it with your will, the more
severe
damage you will have. The more you will bleed. So it's not good to try and challenge the fence. And the other thing is you can't access the shamar by jumping over it, running through it. You need to come through the shepherd. He's the only way that through the entry. And in there, shalom. Beautiful picture with the hedge there. Then it means watch. We saw that previously as well with awaken and be watchful that we saw in the bull. Observe. That's to do with observing the commandments. Surpassing, separate, which has to do with set apartness or holiness. To grow strong, goodness, sweetness, sweet thing, beauty, be pleasing, authority, power, strength, might, he will reign. So we see the same language that we saw previously with the authority that's been given to us, but we see also the language that relates now to the bride is the beautifying, the sweetness. When we studied the book of Esther, she was purified for 12 months, 6 months in waters and cleansing, and then and the perfumes, and then the other one was oils, second 6 months, which more to do with the anointing and ability. We see the same language here in the purification process, which made her set apart and holy so she could come before the king, and she also has the authority now to reign with him, and to her is given authority, power, strength, and might that we have in him. So these three sacrifices give us the progressive steps. The first one has to do with that initial step to be exalted, lifted up, resurrected in new life as you place your sins on the altar. The second one has to do with the tent, the priesthood, how you grow up into maturity. And the third level is the Holy of Holy level, where you become the bride. So you're first the outer court person, you're just a bond servant, just came to faith. The holy place is for the priesthood, where you get nurtured, or where you start to nurture others. And the last level is that ultimate purification of holiness, preparing as the bride for the king. And we see the same three progressive steps in the three sacrifices of the Yom Kippur offerings, which is quite fascinating. Right, last topic. This one is interesting. I just played around with a few words, specifically the word holiness and righteousness. Where it comes from is in Leviticus 19, where it says, and Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, speak to all the congregation, to the children of Israel, and say unto them, you shall be holy, for I, Yahweh, your Elohim, I am holy. The Torah portion is the word Kedoshim. Now, if you pronounce it slightly different, you get the word Kadosh and Yom. Yam. Now, Kadosh means holy, and Yam means sea. Now, the symbolism of the sea means the nations, and the disciples were fishers of men. So the nations are to be holy, and within this name of the Torah portion, we see the plan and ultimate goal of Yahweh is to make all people holy from all nations. It's not only for Israel, it's for everyone. And that's found in this word. And we see the same language in Hebrews, pursue peace with all people and holiness, without which no one will see Yahweh. And the basic logic there is, if you come before him without being holy, you will not have the ability to see anymore, because you'll be dead. As we saw with these Aaron's two sons. Sanctuary is the word mikdash, that comes from the root word kadesh, that means to set apart and be holy. So even the sanctuary, the name of the temple, reflects the holiness. What we see in mikdash, we see the mem in front, which means the word of Yahweh, and the shin reflects on the spirit. And we see the same there with the word kadosh, which means apartness, holiness, sacredness, and set apartness. And kadosh is first found in scripture in Exodus 3 verse 5, when Moses met with Yahweh in the burning bush, and he said to take off your shoes because it is holy. Now, it's the bush and the presence of the bush and the glory of Yahweh that was portrayed through the bush. And that bush was a thorny bush, and it's a small-scale symbol of the large burning bush, which is Mount Thorn. Sinai with a fire on top of the mountain. It's the same bush burning, it's just larger. And the word bush is Senah, where we get the word Sinai from. And what you see there in the middle is the nun. Previously, we saw the nun that was corrupted with the iron. The nun reflected the nature of man. So interacting with the bush, we have the seed inside Senah, which is like the fruit with the seed inside. If you partake of this fruit, it will change your nature. So Senah or Sinai reflects on the giving of the 2 tablets, the 10 commandments that contained the seed that will restore your nature. So that's the connection we make with the word
Messiah.
pictures. Right?
The very Messiah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, so it's all about the evolution of man. We see the samech there. We already talk about the samech. It's in the word Pesach. It's also about the elevation of the turning forces in the cycles of 7, which have to do with purification and elevation of man into a holy state. And the hay on the end means light and truth. But what we saw in the previous Torah portion, we saw this word hay is connected to the moon, and the shin is connected to the sun. Can't recall exactly what this context was. It has to do with the 2 main lights, and the one ruled over darkness and the other one ruled over night. So the moon, that's represented by the hay, is the authority to rule over darkness, which is our fallen state. The sun, or the symbol of the sun, is to rule over light. That's the authority to rule over the kingdom of light, which is Yahweh's. So we don't have the authority to rule over Yahweh's kingdom. We have the authority to rule over darkness, which is the powers and principalities of this world and of the fallen spiritual. So that's a symbol of the hay within that Sanah, which is connected to thorn bush, which is connected to the commandments of Yahweh, and those who engage with it. We get the authority to rule over darkness. The shin inside the bush is the fire and the spirit of Yahweh, the flame that came on top of the people. Flame is the word labah, that comes from the root word lahava, that's found in Psalm 29:7, that says, the voice of Yahweh divided the flames of fire. And the voice of Yahweh divided the flames is a symbol and prophetic picture of the tongues of fire, the voice, tongues, speaking, that came upon the people, and they spoke with other tongues or voices. And the tongues and voices, plural, is linked to Kedoshim, which is plural for holiness, which links to the nations that will be anointed. So everything just harmonized perfectly together through this word picture. I'm going to cut this one short a bit. Combining the Psalm 145:17 is the premise of what I want to look at next. Is it says Yahweh is righteous in all his ways and kind in all his works. Now it says that we need to be holy. He is righteous. We know we can get righteousness through the ram, or which is the work of the Messiah and the sacrifice of the Messiah. The righteousness is the word tzaddik, which is tzadik dalet kuf. That means just, lawful, and righteous. And this is the thing that you preach when you do the avon, rebellious sin. You come against his righteousness. Holiness is the word kadosh, kuf dalet shin. Now what we see here is if we've got two letters that are shared within both. Holiness, kadosh, has got a kuf dalet, and righteousness, tzadik dalet kuf, also have a kuf dalet. And basically the kuf dalet combine the two together. And if we look at the combination of the kuf dalet and the gematria of kuf dalet, it's 104. That means veil, rest, gift, comfort, compassion, foundation, and burning fire. Now that links to the menorah when we discussed that, with fire is the foundation of Yahweh. Yahweh is a consuming fire. We also saw the veil that gives you access to the Holy of Holies, that reveals and also conceals. And we also saw the cloud that's also a veil that's upon the mercy seat. Entering into his rest is to do with the gifts, and also this receiving of the Spirit that we just looked at with the tongues of fire coming upon the people, and the fire, we see that as the foundation of who Yahweh is. So he placed a little bit of himself in us through his Spirit. Now you are a fire, and when you are a broken vessel, just imagine for yourself, if you're a vessel that's intact, there's a fire, and there's no way the light can be shining through. But if this thing is broken, all the cracks, the light will just radiate through the cracks. So your brokenness actually shines his glory. Your character that's been formed shines his glory, nothing else. If you're perfect, no light will come through. You need to be broken to release the light that impart in you. It's a little bit of himself through his Spirit that you receive as a result of Sinai, Mount Thorn, and the receiving of the Holy Spirit, and Pentecost. That's a prophetic picture of that, on which we are on our way. What's the Omer? What's the count?
I don't know.
So 20 something.
No, I think so.
24. Is it 24 today? Of the Omer?
Or how many weeks now? You count 7 weeks.
I think it's 4.
I think we're in the 3rd or 4th week. I think it's
4, 4, I think so. Yeah.
That must be 27.
Be back. We're supposed to be prepared.
Counting every day.
Yeah. I was thinking this morning, and it was because of the wedding and everything. I was not focused on counting whatsoever.
But it was the week before the wedding that was Pesach.
No, 2 weeks.
Okay, so the wedding was on the when? 10th.
Yeah,
So around about the 1st.
4 weeks.
Yeah, so we're going into the 4th
But
week.
no worries. Ivory's Googling.
Ivory, please reveal to us. So
How
we
bad
won't-
is that? This is the first year that Yeah.
But to give you a bit of comfort, it says count the weeks. So you don't count the days necessarily. How do you count the week? You count the Sabbaths.
Yes.
If you count also means to recount or to think back upon things. And what we do, we reflect on the Torah and look back upon the events that's happening within our lives, and also reflecting what's back and bring them back into our little space. So we are counting today when we sit around His Word. So it's okay. Now combining these two words, so Ivory, you have a number for us? Not yet. No, Google is unholy. Doesn't know.
Really?
Oh, counter.
Probably gives you a reminder every day.
Yeah.
All right, so I was just thinking about the combination of these two words and how they relate together, and I thought, what if I connect these two words together? So it's possible if you write tzaddik and kodesh and they share the kuf.
Which 2 words?
Tzaddik and kodesh. So righteousness and holiness can be connected through the letter kuf. Now, if you look at that, you see the kuf is right in the middle. So that's the most important thing. What's the symbol of kuf? the Hebrew picture of kuf?
Monkey.
It's the longest one.
What's a monkey? What does a monkey mean? You need to keep your monkey underfoot and under control. The monkey is the self. That's one of the kuf meanings. What's the other meaning of kuf? The turning of the head. If you turn your head, it means you repent. You turn the other way. Because if you turn your head and you're still walking to the same direction, you're going to trip and fall. You need to follow where your head's facing. So if you repent, you need to follow where you're looking. So your eye can't be to the back where sin is, trying to move forward, because you'll trip up because you can't see where you're going. So you need to focus on him, follow the shepherd, and then you'll follow his ways. Now, what's also evident about the kuf? What can you see in the kuf? I think we discussed it previously.
Connection from
Connection.
below to
It's made
the
up of
spiritual.
the nun
It's a kaf
And vav.
Is it nun?
and a
No,
vav.
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 And the vav is man, the kaf is a hand. It's like the hand is coming down and grab the man and pull him out. The reason I'm saying that is the kuf is the only letter that goes below the line. It's a letter that reaches down to the lowest parts of this kingdom of the south, which is the place of Sheol, the place of the dead. And that's where Yeshua went into. Through his hand, he went into the darkest parts, the dark chamber of bondage, and he pulling them out with his kuf. Now, if we connect it with the largest letter, which is the what? Which is the tallest letter?
Lamed.
The lamed. If you connect the kuf and a lamed, what word does it make?
Love.
It makes two words. Not love. Other way.
Kal.
Kal and kol. Now, kal and kol are the two words for light and sound. And those are the two mediums that Yahweh used to communicate with us.
That's right.
Sound through hearing his word, light through sight, reading his word and observing his creation to what we see. And also spiritual sight, which is the word re'eh, that's insight, that's revelation through his spirit. And that we connect to the lamed. And the kuf and lamed makes Jacob's ladder. It reaches up to the top and it comes down to the lowest part. So that's the, and kuf, when I did the Aleph Bet series, kuf also means a gateway. It's an entry point to access the ladder, to get into. And if you look at the tabernacle, there are 3 gates or 3 entry points. First one is as a bondservant, just be born again. Second one is as the priesthood. Third one is as the bride. And we need to pass through those 3 gateways to sit at the marriage table. If you not pass through the third gate, you're in the holy place. You're like John the Baptist. You'll be one of the guests. Or you'll be like Moses, or those ones who haven't had access to the revelation of Mashiach. They will still be part of the holy people. And those on the outer court, they are the ones who just came in as a result of the birth of the Great Tribulation. Anyway, what you see from the kuf. Now I enter through the kuf. I've got a dalet. What does dalet mean? Door. So I've got 2 doorways. One doorway leads to tzaddik, which is righteousness. Tzaddik means righteousness. So the door that leads to righteousness, what makes me righteous? The blood of Mashiach. That's the ram, the blood of the sacrifice, and also the blood of the bullock. The other dalet is the doorway that leads to shin. What does shin represent? Fire, spirit, and also consuming fire and holiness. So I've got a doorway to righteousness and a doorway to holiness coming from a place of decision where I can enter through both doors, and I have access through the kuf to come in, which is turning the head, repentance. And you need to enter through both gates to be holy and righteous, because they're one thing, sharing the kuf. You can access both. In saying all that, I've got a little picture here in the end. I hope you can see it. I've got the concept of righteousness and holiness. The idea of righteousness is to know what is right and to do what is right. To know what is right, to access through gaining truth. If I have truth and I am faithful in the truth, it's classified as faith. If I apply faith in my life or apply truth in my life, it's declared to me as righteousness. That's why Abraham was righteous, because he was faithful with the truth that he received, which Yahweh said, take your son and offer him. And then he did that. And that was declared to him as righteousness, because he was faithful in the truth that he received in that point in time. We receive a lot of truths through the Torah portion as we go through. As you apply them in your life through faith, it declares you righteous, and the righteousness are little steps that elevate your holiness. So if I live out righteousness, people will see me, see a light that shines different to what they see in the world, which is nothing or darkness. And I radiate that truth through my actions, which is holiness. But my holiness elevates me to have the potential to stand before Yahweh without being consumed. But I need the steps of righteousness, which is not my work, because righteousness is based on the blood of Mashiach. So I can't claim holiness to myself except through faith, applying the truth that's given to me, given access through the work of Mashiach, which is the work of righteousness. So it all plays in together, and those things are basically also cycles that elevate you to levels of holiness through applying truth, studying the truth, through faith, start walking in it, that makes you live righteous life that will be perceived as holiness, radiating those actions in this dark world. So yeah, we've come to the end of the study. Thank you, Shane.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was great.
Yeah. Any last comments, words?
That when you're talking about the clay pot being broken and then the light shining through, there's actually a Japanese art form.
Wabi-sabi.
What is it?
Wabi-sabi.
Wabi-sabi?
Yes,
There was
where
a
you
different name, so where you put the gold,
gold,
you
yeah,
repair
wabi-sabi.
the
Yeah.
broken
Oh,
pieces
yeah.
with gold. That's what it
Yeah.
reminds me of. Yes. And then it becomes, the whole concept is that the brokenness
It
becomes
beautifies
the
it.
history,
Yeah.
it's part of the history of the piece.
There's also a guy in Europe who created art through, his name was Hundertwasser. I think he was an architect or an artist of some sort. And whenever there was a crack in the building, he chipped the crack open and then he did mosaic tiling. Mosaic. Most beautiful.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And it follows the natural crack in the wall that gave the framework of the artwork. Beautiful.
Have you seen down at Brunswick Heads? There's a wall, brick wall, and there's a chip taken out, and somebody's repaired it with Lego.
Oh yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Oh, there's something I forgot.
What?
This fancy word that I created, combining the two, have the gematria of 498. That means he opened and rest. It's like a gateway to enter his rest. And 4, 9, and 8 are basically the count. You count 49, and the 50th one is number 8, which is new beginnings. That's how you enter into number 8. It's through that.
Today's 27 of the
That's what I said. Yeah, you go.
All right, so shall we close in prayer and then we can conclude the study? Who wants to pray for us?
Father, the depth in your word is just mind-boggling. Doesn't seem to matter from what direction you approach things, there is more and more and more confirmation that your word is true, and your word is life, and your word is light, Lord God. And we thank you that we have this opportunity to gain a greater understanding of your word, and not only that, to have a stronger and a stronger foundation in our lives of truth, and strengthening of our faith in so many different ways. We just ask you through your Holy Spirit to make the word that we've studied today life for us, in every action in the future. And Father, those areas that need to be addressed for each one of us, that you would bring enlightenment and direction to each one of us in order that we might proceed in our journey with you towards the place of true holiness. And we thank you for everything that you've provided for us through your Son, our Lord and our Saviour, Yeshua.
Amen.
Amen.